Yeah, I mean, it's just Luke Ford and the dangers of e-personality. And he's an introvert, incel or whatever. And when he comes out on the internet, he has this, like the dark side of his subconscious becomes conscious. I mean, to me, it's obvious. That's what happens. It's what's happening to you on the same way. But your unconscious, your subconscious is different than Gandalf's subconscious.
Logic and science dictate that not only consciousness doesn't exist, consciousness is in fact scientifically impossible. And yes, it is going to involve math and calculus and science and computer programming. I'm sorry. And that have different implications of the process with the connection between the levels of a person's soul and how it reincarnates.
But I'm not going to spur on the issue because I'm not a woman. It's not my issue.
About how one day you're going to fulfill the Canadian dream or the American dream. So you watch Seinfeld and say, I could do it. I'm going to go out tomorrow and go to work and have a great day, and I'm going to be successful. And one day I'm going to have my own apartment. I'm going to have my own parties with my own friends over, and I'm going to have my own possessions. I'm going to see things that I want and just buy them.
Yeah, but that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of yours.
I think we'll have. I should be on with T-Jump tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Looking forward to that. I prepared quite a few stuff this week to talk about the least action principle, some slides. So hopefully we'll cover that at a much more in-depth level. And not sure if we have any guests lined up. I guess there's some drama with politically provoked. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit, but may not be that interesting to this audience. I don't think anyone from
Conops messaged me about something, and I was like, "Yeah, I don't want to know." But
not much crossover, but with this audience and that. And James, Happy New Year's. So I saw Amy Newman is the 2 weeks from now will be the modern day debate in IRL debate event, and I saw Amy Newman is going to be one on the panel. T-Jump's in 4 of those. I think T-Jump is by far the most common debater. Destiny, also one of the bigger names, but also going to be in multiple debates and panels. So I have a lot of stuff to screen share. So not that much exciting this week. I had my Charles Moskowitz regular. Now we're doing it at 10 o'clock, and we're no longer doing it on YouTube. So, if people follow that, hopefully see it on Rumble or just check his Twitter, social media. He's posting it 10 different platforms. So I have to check my text message. So if you just talk for a second.
Hello, everyone. I am excited to be here, excited to hear about I think it's called DebateCon, correct me if I'm wrong, and see how that goes. Oh, looks like Doooovid is back.
And I tuned in Luke Ford for a second. He was talking about YouTube drama or something like JF. Not sure. I think Luke said he is coming back to Los Angeles. Doesn't surprise me. I figured he'd come back, but see. And then I guess the COVID numbers here in the U.S. really skyrocketed. Possibly the Omicron. God forbid. Hopefully it's less serious. They said the Omicron, some evidence that it's causing less severe sickness and deaths than is the Delta variant, but the numbers were biggest ever. They said like over 500,000 new case infections in the last few days. The U.S. has been averaging like in the 300,000s of case infections, and that literally means like 1% of all of America got infected. There's like some 300 million people, so 300 some thousand is about 1% of all of America, and so that means the last few days, another 1% of all America has been infected. So like I've been very careful, laying low. Um, pretty concerned about that, but we probably won't talk about that much. But just kind of a wait and see. And globally, seeing Europe, also the numbers, Israel. We'll see if it's just America or globally, if Omicron, how serious it is, and if it's just more infectious, but it's not as deadly as they said. It doesn't seem to replicate in the lungs as much. So, so be careful, anybody out there. So let me enter screen share right away. I'll do my share my links at the beginning of the week, just because I already opened them up to get them off the table. So did you appear to do anything interesting this week?
I had mostly family obligations this week. A lot of gardening. So didn't have too many exciting times. Thanks for asking. Did do a lot of thinking, though. Look forward to talking about that.
Yeah, I noticed.
Oh my gosh, Kyle Fan is back. Bro! It's been so long. Welcome back. Back over to you, Doooovid.
Yeah, I noticed you didn't see the message I sent. I was just sending links, so it didn't matter. I figure maybe you went away or with your family. But okay, so is the screen share working?
I am just about to switch it over out. That's why. There we go. I shouldn't try to multitask this early in the show. All right. I've got that switched up, and I just have to full screen it. So I'm just scrolling to find it. Just need another, like, there we go. It's done. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so we're talking about the least action principle quite a bit. Jennifer likes to bring it up. And I was mentioning last week that has like philosophical and mathematical connotations. I did some research, some review on the principle. Like I'd taken physics and math and read a lot of philosophy of math. So here's a nice playlist of like quick videos on the least action principle, 30 some videos, Michael Van Bison, and you'll see the mathematically the least action principle mostly related to physics. I got some slides.
Have you seen how it's kind of axiomatizing wave-like properties? It's talking about a minimized deviation from a path.
Yeah, I mean, it has the same connotation in all aspects. And it's interesting, this book here by Jennifer Cooper-Smith, which I'm in the middle of, she lays down the least action principle as basically the fundamental principle of all of science. And, and traces its history through ancient times and philosophy from Aristotle and to
well, there's the argument of like water always finding its level. I'm sure you could make some least action based argument for that.
Yeah, we'll look at these slides and we'll see some interesting things. This was interesting. I finished Henry Doktorski's books. I'm not sure if we're going to maybe I'll have him on again. We'll talk about it more, but it looks like Elon Musk, Lex Friedman's streaming a recap on his Elon Musk and doing a Q&A. So there's a book out, White Utopias, the Religious Exoticism of Transformational Festivals. And it looks at mostly Bhakti Fest, Shakti Fest, Wanderlust, LIB, and Burning Man. And it mentions how these are predominantly white gatherings and, also like Native American culture, but just the sociological phenomenon of whites doing yoga, largely among whites in these gatherings that are very popular even globally, especially here in the U.S., like Burning Man, that attract a largely white audience to do Eastern things. So she wrote a book. This is I didn't get her book, but I watched a few of her videos. So it's interesting take. This woman is actually in New Zealand, a Hare Krishna, um, former Hare Krishna devotee. So she made this video series, Why I Left the Krishna Cult. And I guess she used to even make videos for the Hare Krishna. She was promoting it. And then um, in the last half a year, she decided to leave being a Hare Krishna. And so she made some videos going over, separate, like 7 separate videos going why she joined, what it was like for each year, and then why she eventually left. So it's not like Henry Doktoretsky, if I talked to him, like his Guns, Gold, Guns and Gods, the history of New Vrindavan, Kirtananda Swami, where you got, God forbid, serial murders and child molestation, all these horrible things. She doesn't have like any of these horrible things that happen, but more like existential, where it was very interesting to her why she joined, and then leaving, not necessarily that something horrible happened to her, but just kind of like a crisis of faith, or just, like a reassessment of her own personal life. And she's also in New Zealand, so it's kind of interesting. Um, so I was watching these videos from the Japanese channel about the neural correlates of consciousness, and they were talking about the unfolding argument related to the neural correlates of consciousness. And I guess unfolding here, it's a transformation of technique of duplicating the fundamental blocks to increase the throughput of the DSP program, digital signal processing, in such a way that preserves its functional behavior at its outputs. And so unfolding is like an algorithmic function of computers to unfold an algorithm in a way that still preserves its functional behavior. And here's this famous paper written 2 years ago on consciousness, the unfolding argument, why um, IIT, the integrated information theory, and other causal structural theories cannot explain consciousness. So interesting stuff. Some T-Jump. I'm assuming we're going to focus mainly on consciousness. I'm not sure, he might want to talk about Judaism, but I'm not sure if he's going to want to talk about Judaism, religion, theology. But I'm assuming we're probably going to talk mostly about consciousness. So interesting to check out. Some recent Edward Dutton videos here, why the Scrooge, the Grinch, and the left hate Christmas themselves and the rest of reality, talking about kind of like modern day dysgenics, and the nature of why people are on the left, and kind of like hate everybody, or teaming up, and this kind of like rough competition of and also the Flynn effect. Here is this other video about God forbid, why are social sexual women more feminine looking? And so actually you're saying that women who are more promiscuous have more testosterone and actually more masculine looking. Interesting takes. He's talking about the Flynn effect and decreased IQ and technology and kind of these dystopian visions, where he's questioning how long will the reverse Flynn effect take place? How low will IQ sink before there's some sort of reshuffle of society? So interesting stuff. I used to watch more of Dutton. I haven't really been watching him, but I tuned in for those last ones. This book is out of Michigan, University of Michigan, professor in Oakland University here in Michigan, The Principle of Least Action, History and Physics. Check your local library. This one's kind of expensive, like $100. But, talking about pretty interesting things related mostly to the mathematics of the least action principle. And you'll see, I'll show in the slides where we talk about Fermi to Newton to Lagrange to Hamilton to classical mechanics. I mean, to modern quantum theory, and that this least action principle is one of the glues that holds together modern physics, or at some point becomes the stationary active action principle in the time of like the Lagrange and Hamilton, where the nature of what is the least action principle talking about somewhat changes. And so it was some good slides. Here's kind of this lame 80s movie with Jim Belushi. I like this movie, Lean on Me, with Morgan Freeman, about Joe, the African American principal that cleans up this school in New Jersey. So this was kind of made in that era where he plays like a principal that cleans up some school, and there's like violence, and the students try to kill him. He ends up beating up beating up the bad guys, and at the end, like um, I was thinking of the least action principle rhymes with principle, that you have principle, like least action principle, and you have principle, the principle, like the principle. So at the end of this 80s movie, is after he like beats up the bad guy and cleans up the school, one of the guys outside is like, who the hell do you think you are? And one of the students who took the principal's side early on is like, he's the principal, man. And so James Belushi repeats back, yeah, I'm the principal, man. So I'm not sure, like for a rap rhyme, if I do, like principal and principal sounds the same, and they're different words. If anyone's more scholarly in the audience, here's an interesting article about the metaphysics of the least action principle, even talking about like Newton's law of motion, more philosophical, and Leibniz, and the best of all possible worlds, more philosophical. Here's some good slides. Here is a modern day interpretation of the least principle of stationary action related to rendering neural state equations, which quite very complicated nature of trying to model the brain. It was too big to share in the chat. There's another paper about the principle of stationary action related to neural circuits. Some more slides I'll be sharing. And actually, interesting, I shared this to Jennifer, if memes of destruction comes later, that Richard Feynman actually wrote his PhD thesis on the principle of least action, as and its relationship to quantum theory, and he goes through from the Newtonian sense to relationship to quantum theory. And you could get his thesis like 70 pages. Here's from his lectures archives, his class on the least action principle, and you could actually play. I think they even have the recording of the class he gave, so you could actually listen to Richard Feynman class on the least action principle. I talked about this with Charles Moskowitz. Kind of interesting. Israeli politics right now, you can no longer convert to Judaism. Politics has happened in a certain way where there's been dispute in the Bennett coalition, this reform rabbi and the chief rabbi, causing a temporary suspension of all conversion to Judaism. So as of now, you cannot convert and become a Jew until this dispute has been resolved. And then also in Israel, God forbid, there was this Me Too case with this rabbi, popular author of children's book that God forbid had been accused of even rape. And usually ultra-Orthodox Jews like to settle things on the down low, don't let things getting public. But this was put into secular newspapers, and it got out, and his books were taken off shelves, and so this rabbi committed suicide. And then in his suicide note, he shot himself, God forbid. And then in his suicide note, he claims he's innocent, and said he's gonna a din Torah in heaven, in the heavens, that he's going to call a court case against his accusers. And then, God forbid, one of the women that accused him also committed suicide. So it was Crazy News in Israel talked about that with Charles Moskowitz. Here's interesting YouTube channel. Quanta magazine had the biggest breakthroughs in physics, and they also have one of the biggest breakthrough in mathematics and computer programming. Some interesting things of this year. So we showed last week. We talked about the James Webb Space Telegraph, and we even showed how you could derive the Lagrange too. That actually Euler had originally showed the Lagrange point 1 and 2, and then Lagrange derived all 5 Lagrange points, and we went over that last week. And although Euler came up with so many things that a lot of things they called something else, like so it called the Lagrange point, even though really Euler was the first person to discover it. So as you see now in this, it is close to 60% of the distance to the Lagrange point, over 500,000 miles from Earth, about another 400,000 to go. It's moving at about 0.36 miles a second, which would be about 100 miles a minute, or so moving pretty quite fast, about 6,000 miles an hour. And so you can see on the chart right now that the sun shield is being erected, and then the secondary mirror. And so people want to keep track of what's going on with that. Here's the official NASA webpage. I ordered this new textbook of Stephen Grossberg he had this adaptive resonance brain theory I went over on my original YouTube series after the JF debate. And so he spoke at a local synagogue, because he's a Reformed Jew, about art and how the brain perceives art. And I've also been watching these videos I shared from this professor in Boston. He's Indian, actually tweeted on YouTube, told him good videos, and he liked it. But I ordered his textbook, so he wrote a new textbook on the brain, like a materialist perspective. And his adaptive resonance theory is one of the top theories on the market for a non-quantum model of the mind. Here's the Elon Musk video on Friedman, talked about going to Mars, like 8 billion. He said right now it would cost about $8 billion. So right now Lex is doing a Q&A, and I guess he had Michael Malice on New Year's. I didn't watch that. Maybe I'll watch that. So that's my week in review. Not sure if do you want to go straight into these slides on the least action principle?
Sure. Sounds like it would be a good segue at this time.
Yeah, so these are... I have 2 slides. The other one's better than this. I'll do the shorter one first of so just...
I think it's pretty good. Can you see it on the screen there? What do you think?
Yeah, so I'll just share this slide, and I'll go to the longer one. So if people want to see these slides on the least action principle, go ahead. So here is Department of Physics, it's an Indian professor, I'm not sure where, on the least action principle. And when I took physics, advanced mechanics, we worked on this problem. And maybe even in high school physics, we had talked about a problem like this. And so to say, if you're standing on a beach and you're trying to get someone water, maybe they're drowning. And so what is the shortest path to the person? And so you have three different models of, so let's say that you could run quicker than you could swim, and then maybe the distance. So if you took a straight path from, like, say, point A to B, and that wouldn't necessarily be that might be the shortest distance, but it wouldn't be the quickest path, because the quickest path would probably be the green path, because you could run further on land. So you would run the majority of the horizontal distance on land, and then swim a shorter distance, because running is quicker. But possibly if it was energy, that that maybe it would even be quicker to run less on land than swim more. So it depends. What do you mean by least action? You mean least time, least energy, or least distance?
It's definitely not least distance.
Well, I mean, in this example, the way they have it, so you have least distance, least action, and least time, which are all going to give you three different paths. Just thinking of the least action principle.
Sorry, I missed that in the diagram. Okay, gotcha.
So if you're trying to minimize different things, you're trying to minimize energy, distance, or time. And so I took this in physics, and you could have a formula, and it would be based on the energy and the angles, and a basic minimization, that if it was actually like running to a beach and swimming, if you had some sort of formula to determine the time or the energy for swimming. And so if you're looking at least action, at least in this example, I'm not exactly sure why they're saying swimming is taking less action than running, but
Probably
the
just
example,
a random example, but there'd be less friction in water.
Yeah, possibly. But if time, that presumably it's quicker to run than to swim, versus the pure shortest distance. So for a particle of fixed energy traveling from point A to B, its trajectory is such that the corresponding action has the minimum possible value. And I'll put these slides in the chat also. So if you're looking like a cricket ball or any type object, I showed this on a week in review. This slides didn't have it, I don't think, but there was an ancient curve like 400 years ago. They discovered that basically wherever you drop a ball from, it reaches the bottom at the same point due to the curvature and the amount of speed that it picks up. So if you drop it, at the top of the curve versus near the very bottom, in the way that it's sloped, that it would actually take the exact amount of time. So just looking at like these basic physics derivation formulas, a minimization of energy, time, or distance, and so here you even have from problems like this, differential equations, and reducing it to formula that would give you a minimization of energy, distance, or time. So let me read here the Newtonian approach. Given initial position and velocity of a particle, Newtonian method builds up its trajectory in an incremental manner by updating the velocity and position. Energy of the particle may or may not be fixed. Principle of least action says if the particle of fixed energy has to go from point A to B, the path it takes is that which minimizes the action. But can this be right? Our explanation for the route taken by the light beam, first formulated by Fermi in the 17th century as the principle of least time, assumes that light somehow knows where it's going in advance and that it acts purposely in getting there. So this is called the teleological explanation. That you're saying that what path like does a light beam, and we'll see later that the least action principle has a lot to do with optics, like the path of light going through different mediums. But saying, well, what path did the light take? The light took the path that minimized action, but like, how did the light beforehand know which path would minimize action? So, it's a
Because
pretty
it's self-referential without knowing it's self-referential. It's basically invoking a property of light and then saying, oh, light obeys a property of light. It's like, well, of course. And the property is the wave-likeness. So, like,
So I
do you understand the basic argument for the least action principle? How you can intuitively understand something going from point A to point B, and then considering every other possible way that it could go in the vicinity, that it will minimize its penetration of those paths, but that the penetration will not be nothing. So it's not literally going along that line. It is at a minimal distance from that line as it goes through the whatever we're calling a path trajectory.
Yeah, so it looks like it's actually going to be relatively complicated in the sense that it's basing off of a postulate that can't be proven, is the essential postulate that Aristotle makes.
It's the same as the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. It's the notion that things interfere with themselves non-trivially in the 0 point state.
Possibly. I mean, let's see how these slides describe it.
Yeah.
And so the idea that things in nature behave in a goal-directed way goes back to Aristotle. The final cause in Aristotle's physics is the end of telos, towards which a thing undergoing change is aiming. To explain the change by its final cause is to explain it in terms of the result it achieves. An efficient cause, by contrast, is that which initiates the process of change. To explain a change by its efficient cause is to explain it in terms of prior conditions. One view of scientific progress is that it consists of replacing teleological final cause explanations with mechanistic efficient cause explanations. The Darwinian revolution, for instance, can be seen in this way. Traits that seem to have been purposefully designed like a giraffe's long neck were re-explained as the outcome of a blind process of chance variation and natural selection. So that was the introduction. So here it's going to give kind of a historical overview, and we're going to look at Aristotle, the reflection of light, hero of Alexandria, Fermi's principle of least time for light propagation, Descartes versus Fermi, the wave theory of Fermi and Fermi, Maupertuis, Maupertuis principle of least action, Euler-Lagrange, Hamilton, and then quantum connections. So Aristotle on the motion of planets, if the motions of the heaven is to measure all of the movements, whatever, in the virtue of being alone, continuous, and regular and eternal, and if in each kind the measure is the minimum and the minimum movement is the swiftest, then clearly the movement of the heaven must be the swiftest of all movements. Now the lines which return upon themselves, the line which bounds the circle is the shortest, and the movement is the swiftest which follows the shortest line. Therefore, if the heaven moves in a circle and moves more swiftly than anything else, it must necessarily be spherical. So this is where Aristotle, in talking about heavenly motions, mentions this idea that becomes the precursor for the least action principle, and kind of saying that everything naturally returns to its place, and it gets to that place by taking the swiftest, shortest path, and which either could be a circle or a line or a sphere, depending on the circumstance. But saying, why is the motion that it is, and saying because of the least action principle. So that's how the way Aristotle largely appears to be the first historical record of this least action principle, and to some extent, the Aristotelian laying out of the least action principle is still basically the same understanding till today, largely. So, Hero of Alexander, famous inventor, talking about the reflection of light. Whatever moves with unchanging velocity moves in a straight line. For because the impelling force, the object in motion strives to move over the shortest possible distance, since it is not the time for slower motion, that is for motion over longer trajectory. The impelling force does not permit such retardation, and so by reason of its speed, the object tends to move over the shortest path. But the shortest of all lines having the same endpoints is a straight line. Now, by the same reasoning, that is, by consideration of the speed of incidence and reflection, we shall prove that these rays are reflected at equal angles in the case of plane and spherical mirrors, for our proof must again make use of these minimum lines. And so this kind of like post-Euclidean geometry, early optics, and understanding on how light reflects, and an explanation for why light reflects in the way that it does.
This still appears to be quite Euclidean. I mean, this paradigm implies that parallel lines don't intersect here. Most anything on papyrus, aka paper, is going to be Euclidean paradigm. It's unavoidable.
Well, Euclidean is just the geometry. So Hero is adding
It's the necessity that parallel lines never intersect, which seems silly, but does cause problems when it's axiomatized.
Yeah, well, I mean, Hero's after Euclid, although they say Euclid is more probably canonized, but he's talking about the nature of light and reflection, and why light reflects according to these geometric understandings, and he's explaining that it is the principle of least action that causes light to take these shortest distances as defined by Euclidean geometry. So,
as modeled by Euclidean geometry.
Yeah, so just saying, why does light follow the path of Euclidean geometry? Is saying because this principle of least action, that light tends towards the shortest distance, which could be derived by Euclidean geometry. And really, for the next like 1500 years, there's not much progress in the least action principle. There's some progress in optics, but philosophically, it looks like there really wasn't much progress till Fermi. And Fermi has a principle of least time, which is also based on light. And this is similar to what we're showing at the beginning in the refraction of light in Snell's law, where you have light going through two different mediums and the angle changes. So probably even in ancient times, that something that someone would notice if you shine light on water or on a glass, like a prism, that the angle changes. And so Snell's law in 1621, sine over angle 1 divided by sine over angle 2 equals a constant. And if the medium 2 is denser than the medium 1, the constant will be greater than 1. If the medium 1 is denser than medium 1, then the constant will be less than 1. So Snell, I guess, is Fermi. So Descartes has a argument, a mechanical one, based on the fact that the component of velocity along the surface remains unchanged. So if why is this so? So Snell had recognized this relationship in terms of light traveling through two different type mediums and the angle. And so Descartes has an explanation based on velocity, saying that the velocity remains constant. The velocity times sine of the angle equals velocity times sine of the other angle. Descartes explained that the constancy of the ratio of sine angles in terms of the ratio of speed of light in the two medium.
There's probably very limited utility to reading out something as random as Snell's law.
Well,
I
I
don't
mean,
see how that connects to the least action principle at all.
well, because it's the nature of why light is moving the way it is, and saying Descartes, light has to be moving faster in the denser medium, and Fermi, a generalization of Hero's explanation of the reflection to include the refraction of light. During refraction of light ray does not take the path of least distance. That would be a straight line. So this concept of Hero of Alexander and Aristotle of things following kind of these perfect shapes of lines and spheres, um, at some point they start to question what happens with light that bends, traveling two different mediums. So, these great minds, Fermi, Descartes, Snell, are adapting this principle of least action, of trying to explain why the light bends. So for Fermat's principle of least time, light moves slower in the denser medium. So Descartes was incorrect, but Fermat corrects Descartes' mistake. And so instead of the least action principle, which in ancient times would have been based on purely distance, the least distance principle, here you're having kind of a least time principle. And the reason why the light bends is because the light's moving slower and therefore the distance changes. But this becomes important for the development of the least action principle. Descartes believed that light traveled infinitely fast. Of the infinite ways to analyze the motion of light, the author has taken only that one which serves him for his conclusion. He has therefore accommodated his means to the end, and we know as little about the subject as we did before. So therefore, Fermi rejects Descartes' assertion of the infinite speed of light, and therefore is a logical conclusion that light travels faster in water than air. According to Fermi, light travels at finite speed in air and slowed down in water. And this was experimentally verified by Romer, 1675, and then eventually Foucault, 1850, measured this. So then you have Clessier. That path which you reckon the shortest because it is the quickest is only a path of error and bewilderment, which nature is no way follows and cannot intend to follow. For as nature is determinate in everything she does, she will only and always tend to conduct her works in a straight line. So Chesler proves and does not simply suppose that light moves more easily through dense bodies than through rare ones, which is probably incorrect. But if you see historically, Fermi replies, she has an obscure and hidden ways that I've never had the initiative to penetrate. I merely offered her a small geometric assistance in a matter of refraction, supposing she has a need of it. But since you, sir, assure me that she cannot conduct her affairs without this, and that she is satisfied with the order that Descartes has prescribed, I willingly relinquish my pretended conquest of physics, and shall be content if you will leave me with a geometric problem quite pure and unabstracted, by which means of which there can be found the path of a particle which travels through two different media and seeks to accomplish its motion as quickly as it can. So it just kind of interesting historically. It's a basic physics problem that like I'm sure Jennifer took basic optics, or even high school people may take basic optics, and you're looking at the refraction problem where Hero was talking about pure Euclidean angles versus the known phenomenon that the angle of incidence changes when light goes through a surface that is more or less dense, like glass or water. So I'm not sure if you've thought about that. I'm sure you recognize the physical laws, or if it means something to you historically, that this is kind of what precipitated the advancement of the least action principle, was trying to explain why light bends going through water.
Yeah, I took one optics course and the explanations made very little sense to me. And I don't remember ever being presented a least action type argument, but could be wrong. And just on that topic, I looked up Lagrange, the Lagrangian. I didn't realize how heavily these notions weighed or borrowed from the least action principle. It's basically derived from it. The
Yeah, I
Lagrange
mean,
mechanics.
Lagrange becomes the stationary, but it was saying that, yeah, I was just looking into this week, and so it appears that the least action principle is really the kind of thread of philosophy, ancient philosophy of movement through modern physics, and this question of why light bends um, going through different surfaces. And Newton also, like, his first major work was on optics. So you have Huygens wave theory. Um, it's before Newton, the principle of least time. According to Huygens theory, light travels as a wave with path of a light ray being in the direction perpendicular to the wavefront. Um, so Huygens wave theory of light, which later, like the slit experiment, and but as the actual principle is the principle of stationary or saddle time. Consider a light beam that starts in the diverging manner from point A and then converges to point B. All their nearby paths of light should not have different time or arrivals, implying stationary uh, of time travel. So this is the point where the least action principle starts becoming the stationary action principle, looking at light and then considering light as a wave, and the nature of how light as a wave would may travel in a different manner as opposed to a ray. And this is way before quantum theory. We're just talking about mirrors and prisms and water. Um, so how does light know which path to take? So the wave theory, light does not know which path to take. It takes all possible paths with certain probability, amplitude, and phase, and these probability amplitudes interfere. The phase depends on the time of passage. Path of least time is where the interference is constructive to the largest extent possible. This is because the phase for other nearby paths does not vary much. So if you're looking, just the light bouncing and the least distance path, so like in the center, and it's saying really it's like an integral of a wave, and that the light actually takes all possible paths, and the
with different
central,
probabilities.
yeah,
I'm
and
having
this
trouble
is,
understanding what the phase depends on the time of passage means. That's unclear what that means.
well, it's see that the least action principle needs quite a bit more research, and this, like just the basic slides going over the history from ancient times till today, and we're not even to Newton yet. So I mean, we're not even like talking about the double slit experiment. We're talking about Huygens before Newton, just talking about a light bouncing off a mirror and trying to explain what's going on. Does there one ray of light that hits some point and bounces off according to basic Euclidean geometry and maybe Snell's law, or is it a wave? And so there's actually experiments back then. So this one skips over Newton and saying really, the book of Jennifer Cooper Smith was saying that the least action principle is really at the center of Newton's laws of motion. But here we get to, Maupertuis, Lagrange, and Euler. So nature acts in a way so that it renders a quantity called action a minimum. And Newton, at least in his laws, probably basing this third law of motion, a second law of motion, equal and opposite reaction, or if there is no force acting continues to move in the same direction. A lot of people say that that's largely based off of the least action principle, but he doesn't necessarily talk about it in that way. Maupertuis, the agreement between different laws of nature that until now seemed incompatible. So he's trying to explain the propagation of light and movement of a particle by a single principle. Action is defined as the product of mass velocity, and distance.
Reminds you of torque.
Well, it's really half of mv squared. That these, but to think about the classic laws of physics in terms of least action, the velocity of two masses involved in a perfect inelastic collision, and here it's mv squared, but you have if you have different velocities and you have a minimization of change in action leading to the conservation of momentum. So that is really the least action principle that is at the heart of what I guess the conservation of momentum was the first of the conservation laws that became established. And, so I assume people are familiar with these laws, and, see a direct example, and then Snell's law verified through the principle of least action. So now it starts getting more complicated with Lagrange. The principle looked at analytically consists in that the motion of bodies which act upon each other, the sum of the product of the masses with the velocities and with the distances traveled, is a minimum. The author deduced from it the laws of reflection and refraction of light, as well as those of the impact of bodies. But these applications are too particular to be used for establishing the truth of a general principle. Besides, they have somewhat vague and arbitrary character, which can only render the conclusion that might have been deduced from the true correctness of the principle unsure. But there is another way in which it may be regarded more generally, more rigorous, in which itself merits the attention of the geometers. Euler gave the first hint of this in the end of Trace de Isoprometries in 1744. The principle of least action in mechanics. Before paying attention to the problem, Euler had already developed calculus of variations and given the Euler condition for making the variation of an integral in basic form we have today between two fixed points vanish with respect to arbitrary variation. There you have a partial derivative explanation of this law. So consider a particle moving the xy plane under the influence of a force with an x component and a y component, and you have the centripetal force. The aim is to see if the principle of least action gives the same answer. And so the calculus here of doing the integration leading to calculus different form derivation of Newton's second law of the conservation principles being derived from calculus. So this was the advancement of Euler to Newton's laws. An advancement of calculus makes action stationary is absolute equivalent to a particle's equation of motion. For many interacting particles, minimization leads to the equation of motion. So basically, Lagrange advanced the calculus on Newton's second law and reformulated it in a way based on this least action principle that comes in a stationary action principle and is now the basis of basic modern mechanics. But that if you study physics or have these problems and set it up using the Lagrangian and say, well, why are we doing this? What is the philosophical logical basis for it? It is the least action principle, and the also behind the conservation laws. Like conservation laws, they make sense maybe at some level as a postulate, but really the conservation laws are a derivative of the least action principle also. And so the calculus there might be a little advanced. Maybe we'll go over that more at some point. Let me we got base takes here. I'm not sure if spiritual moms or if you want to talk about politically provoked or have some of these people on to talk about that. That's up to you. But let's finish these slides. At least get some intellectual output here. So does the principle of least action teach us anything new? In a characteristic way, the principle of least action did not at first exercise an appreciable effect on the advance of science, even after Lagrange had completely established it as part of mechanics. It was considered more as an interesting mathematical curiosity and as an unnecessary corollary to Newton's laws of motion. Even in 1837, Poisson could only call it a useless rule. This from essay Max Planck. However, it changed when Hamilton entered the scene in the 1830s. In Hamilton's principle of varying action between parallel between geometric optics and mechanics, and considering action integral as a function of the endpoints of a true path, the integral is obviously taken along the true path. As the path is increased by changing s over the next point, can this equation be used instead to find the path taken by light? And so you're the conventional approach. So I'm going to skip some of the calculus. That's even a little more advanced for Doovid. This even, God forbid, beyond Doovid's pay grade. And reading more into this, and so like I got tapped out from getting my degree in physics, largely at the point of the Lagrange Hamiltonians. But you see, if the point of equal action for each ray are joined together, light rays move in the direction perpendicular to the surface so formed, perpendicular to the surface of constant actions. So action is equivalent to space part of phase. So it's back on Huygens' theory of waves and mechanical systems. Plus, you have an advancement on Lagrange's equation to the Hamiltonian. And these give the trajectory of action for projectile motion. That, the basic laws. And then fast forward to the 1920s, you have the connection to quantum mechanics. When it was discovered that particles have a wave associated with them, Hamilton's theory became the natural choice to account for and develop the quantum mechanical wave equation, and eventually the Schrodinger's equation, which is a direct advancement on the Hamiltonian equations, the advancement on Lagrange, on Euler, on Newton. So rather than looking for solutions to the equation, so even amateur mathematicians, physicists could see the similarities between the Hamiltonian and the Schrodinger equation. And finally, the wave equation and the current Schrodinger equation as we have used today. So wrapping up a comparison between classical and quantum mechanics of Feynman, classical mechanics path of a particle is that of least action and therefore normal to the surfaces of constant action. Quantum mechanics, because the waves associated with a particle, it does not know which path to take. It takes all possible paths with certain probability, amplitude, and phase of these. Probability, amplitudes interfere. The phase depends on the action. Path of least action is where the interference is constructive to the largest extent possible. Classically, we see only those result when amplitudes interfere constructively, giving a large final amplitude. So Planck on the principle of least action. As long as physical science exists, the highest goal to which it aspires is the solution of problems of embracing all natural phenomenon observed and still to be observed in one simple principle, which will allow all past and especially future occurrences to be calculated. Among the more or less general laws, the discovery of which characterized the development of physical science during the last century, the principle of least action is at present certainly one which, by its form and comprehensiveness, may be said to have approached most closely to the ideal aim of the theoretical inquiry. On this occasion, everyone has decided for himself which point of view he thinks is the basic one. You can be a teleologist if you wish. You can be a mechanist if that better suits your fancy, or you may be left wondering whether this is yet another metaphysical distinction that does not make a difference. So appreciate putting up with the long digression into the least action principle. Very important there. See, even coming into the multiple truth hypothesis, that it's also probably the multiple truth hypothesis, also somewhat a derivative of the least action principle, and to think about kind of all of modern physics hinging on the least action principle also, as Jennifer talks about quite frequently. So and also you see the mathematics was somewhat behind.
Yeah, I just pulled up the page for Lagrange. And it's basically directly referencing it. I'll just look it up again. Principle of least action. Instead of thinking about the particles accelerating in response to applied forces, one might think of them picking out the path with a stationary action, with the endpoints of the path and configuration space held fixed at the initial and final times. So, can you see how it's kind of modeling a cycle without coming right out and saying it? No?
Well, I mean, it's trying to create a formulaic explanation to describe what we observe and what we will observe, like Planck said, and the advancement from Lagrange to Hamilton to having a better and better explanation to thoroughly describe what we observe and predictions of what we will observe, most specifically for light propagation, let alone like larger mechanics of physical objects. But the highest level, I guess, would be of the movement of light and the observation of light.
I just always heard of it in the context of general field equations of quantum mechanics. It was never referred to in the context of light. Light was only really ever referenced as electromagnetism, as there being a magnetic field perpendicular to the electric field of light intrinsically, and that you could essentially fully describe light by asserting its frequency. I mean, I'm struggling to remember even optics being derived from the least action principle. It seemed to be derived based on lines, approximating light as planar waves incident on this two-dimensional surface.
Well, I think it's the conservation principles. I mean, you need the conservation principles, and the conservation principles to understand those as really the least action principle, or if they're in addition. So when you question whether you need two separate postulates, that you need the least action and you need conservation, or is the least action enough to derive from that conservation, or in totality? So if you just accepted conservation principles as postulates that hold true without thinking too much on that, and even without the conservation principles, just that, why like this shortest path, most efficient assumption that you're expecting things in the material realm to operate according to your shortest path or efficiency, in classifying that as the least action.
The whole point is it's not taking the shortest path. It's obeying the stationary action principle, which is dictating things like the path that it takes, but it's not taking a path necessarily because it's the shortest.
Yeah, it's like physics is more description.
Light would have taken if we're taking that path that the system was taking.
And physics doesn't have to answer the why; it just answers what happens, how it happens, or make predictions. But why it works that way isn't necessarily that's more the realm of, say, the philosophy of science than science itself.
Well, who's saying anything about why? I mean, at what point does it become why? Doesn't it become why when you talk about consciousness, which light is the substrate of? So,
Well, I mean, if it's like, why does, as we look back in the slides and historically, why does light bend when traveling through two different mediums of different densities? And it was saying why, in a sense, like a philosophical nature of material realm versus like a Snell's law says, well, I don't know why it happens, but it happens according to this predictable equation or understanding, and to somewhat of a philosophical grounding, and then the theory of equations, that to make predictive equations, and then even Huygens talking about the wave nature of light, uh, 350 years ago, that had more explanatory power than rays of light, and that light being a conglomerate of all of the waves as opposed to traveling in a straight line. But I see we've
so when
put ourselves down to 6 viewers by talking about the physics of the least action principle.
people want to have an uncertainty. Certainty is intimidating because then you got to be aligned with certainty or know that you're not aligned with certainty. But I guess, yeah. So I'm just trying to remember how it works with Snell's law. It bends towards the normal. It bends towards the line perpendicular to the surface when it's more dense, I think. Is that right? I'm trying to remember the logic of it. It had to do with maybe it was argued on a temporal basis that the angle had to shift. Since light was slowing down in the more dense medium, the angle had to shift so that the amount of time it took for the light to pass through one of the axes of the surface to remain the same.
Yeah, that was the dispute between Fermi and Descartes, whether the light was speeding up or slowing down, or the nature of the speed of light, and then what exactly is conserved. If light is not traveling the shortest distance and changing angles, that that was in conservation of something, and that would be conservation of velocity, or
yeah, so I guess one of the ways of presenting it is that there's a conservation of the amount of time it takes to travel. It's been a while, so I'm not too sure.
Yeah, so it's pretty important. You mentioned the least action principle regularly, and so actually, I read a full book on it this week. I'm in the middle of a second book, and then there's articles, and so it's pretty interesting to know that there's a lot more to it, and then historical basis starting with Aristotle. So, and we don't have to spend the whole week in review on the least action principle, but something we'll come back to, an important topic. We'll see that's pretty complicated and needs to maybe even a full stream on or something to really delve down and have and even we did that stream on my channel about the unit circle, and saying like we still don't even really understand the unit circle that well, in terms like your debate in the flat earth, where you really couldn't even easily defeat the flat earthers, and then I recommended possibly an explanation for how you could have by traveling and the shortest path. Like I was just taking this course when I was driving earlier, lecture, saying what's the closest point on the surface travel time in America to Africa, and the answer is Maine. I don't know if you know the geography of America, but Maine is all the way north, and maybe extends a little bit, a good few hundred miles further out into the Atlantic Ocean. But the reason why Maine is the closest point to Africa is not because it sticks so far out to the east, like more than Florida. It's because of the curvature of the Earth, and the great circle, the great arc on the circle, But I don't think I
Yeah,
could make
main's
that.
higher, basically.
Well, it's because the circle, because the Earth is a circle, and the
No, it's
trajectory.
because the geodesic is the intersection of a plane and a sphere.
Yeah, but saying the Earth was flat. Um, the closest point to Africa in the United States would not be Maine; it would be Florida. And the reason why it's Maine is because the Earth is circle. But I'm saying to make that calculation, to actually calculate the distance, and I showed the equations and the Haversine or whatever, and it's somewhat complicated. It's not even calculus; it's just trigonometry. But to calculate the shortest distance on the surface of a sphere between 2 points, or even an elliptoid, is beyond my ability. And so, like if you had that, I saw they had another flat Earth debate. But so like the least action principle, so that'd be,
Both sides could be argued to be in, conformity with least action principle, depending on the argument they took. That's sort of the weakness and strength of it, is it's so general that it's easy to misconstrue.
yeah, I guess Arcan, no one knows or cares what we're talking about, but yeah, I like science and it's important, and science is mostly work and study. Do like tricks or something, and then delving and really working on it, and so we'll put a bookmark in that. I'm not sure if Base Takes is still here in the chat, or Spiritual Moms, or did you want to have people on to talk about politically provoked, or you want us to avoid that topic?
It's up to you. I don't know what happened. I'm not super interested, but if you are, then it's all right. I'll just. Are you done with your presentation? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Let's send Base Takes the link on Twitter. See that he has been unsuccessful in getting on to politically provoked in his kind of like questionable defense of the Jews, and even God forbid what happened with OV and that drama of Spiritual Mamzer. I'm not sure if you have his contact or that's even interesting to you, but okay, so I sent Base Take the link. Professor Magda Ninyan Steele, welcome. Yeah, there's not really
Thanks.
enough science channels on. So, do you want to do your week in review? Do you have things you wanted to share, or
Sure.
you didn't appear anything on this week, did you?
I took over a stage on the T-Jump server, but that was more just happenstance than actually planned out.
It wasn't recorded, and none of those
It was, but it hasn't been uploaded.
by you or T Jump, or you don't know.
Me.
Okay, but you don't know if any of those people actually watch Week in Review, or they're not in the chat.
No, I didn't want to overshare, so I didn't say anything. But I did have I had an idea for thinking about the least action principle, like what the point of this type of reasoning is. It's not just about committing oneself to a particular interpretation fervently and then defending it to the death. It's about appreciating a manner of thinking that works between disciplines to some extent. So think about something that has no shape, and its only attribute is that it has mass and that it has a boundary. But we're not going to conclude anything about its shape, and then we'll say, well, okay, it's under the action of gravity. It exists in our universe, so we're just trying to figure out primacy of the arising of the attributes. So if we presume as little as possible, just that it has mass and that it has a boundary. Because if you don't presume those things, you're kind of there's a bit of a limbo there with what you can really know. So put that in, and we can say that because of the least action principle, that this system, if it's isolated, will reconfigure to minimize the torque about the center of mass, which will give us this shape. It's a sphere, sort of, say, at first approximation, it seems reasonable to go with sphere. Now, is that correct? Well, it's more correct than other models, maybe, or less correct than it could be, but it's not fully, doesn't have full resolution. That's the whole point of the approach, is that you never get full resolution. You just get what you call arbitrary resolution. At some point, it converges. When does it converge? Well, your criteria, your convergence criteria change, right? So you define them, then it happens. It's all about the method, right? So we still haven't actually concluded this reasoning. We're at the point of saying, I see why it's a sphere. Now, why does it not just collapse to a dot under the action of gravity? You know, see, I think it's called Schwarzschild radius. Well, that's because eventually there's a pressure between the electrons comprising this mass. And so it's a question of balance between electric and gravity. And we invoke the least action principle again to minimize the action of the gravity on the electricity, basically. So if you make the surface of that sphere somehow larger while keeping the radius approximately the same, i.e. modelize the surface via least action principle as a sort of oscillating surface, I approximate you can get about pi longer than the perimeter. But then you can do it again, right? You can have another cycle of oscillation within the existing cycle, and then you can continue that pi until you reach the limit set forth by the uncertainty principle. Because the question is, like, given a radius which is not constant, but over a particular interval or integral, it is approximately constant. What is the associated set of dr, or I don't know what you want to call it, individual radii to a total quote sphere, but it's not actually a sphere? What is the associated range of that? It's something you can actually geometrically estimate. It's always going to be based on, the answer is always going to be based on your initial assumptions, but you can estimate it. And that's what least action principles really, to me, that's what's really about, is finding all these points about which the torque is minimized. Because the system doesn't just have one fulcrum. It will have how many? Well, that's connected to the measurement limit, right? Because a fulcrum, what does that point to? Some type of dualism, and we have a limit to the amount of dualism, because we can have 3 + 1 instances of observables, right? Daryl's back. Nice to see you again. Daryl has been running roughshod on the T-Jump server. Made me blush. That was one. Did any of that make any sense? Did Doooovid, did you follow any of that?
Somewhat. I mean, these things are pretty complicated and esoteric. You know, like you need like slides and PowerPoints or something to.
But do you understand the argument that if I take a circle and I use a circle template, and then instead of a circle I make it wavy, that's a longer perimeter to the circle, but the radius of the circle, it's not a circle anymore, but the radius of that object is still the same. The average radius is the same as the circle's radius.
Well, yeah.
You can see that. So there's the squiggly circle is a lesser action shape than the pure circle.
I understand what you said. If you're trying to share something, I don't see anything, but I could see what you.
No, I can't actually find it because I have like a million different images and I have no idea which one it actually corresponds to. So yeah, unfortunately I don't actually have the image that I want to pull up, although it does exist. Oh, you know what? I just found it, so I can. Yay. Oh, this is a really good coincidence there. All right, so I'm going to switch over to internet. So It should come up in about 30 seconds for you if you don't mind checking the YouTube. Sorry, it's the only way I can do it. All right, so that's my week involved a lot of gardening also. I had a lot of fun. My in-laws taking care of their garden. I've got some videos of that. Doesn't really have anything to do with what we normally talk about on the show, but that's what I've been up to. And I got a
link
tan.
sharing now. Here, so your circles. So
I'll go back to the circles.
Professor Magda Thiel, so you're professor of neuroscience at Magdeburg. This is Magdeburg. It's in Germany. That's awesome. Did you want to come on Week in Review? I'm not sure if you're in Germany now or.
Now remember all the trolls. I'm not saying this is necessarily a troll. I'm just saying it might be a troll.
I mean, there's only 6 people watching. You think like
that doesn't mean it's not a troll. I mean, probably the reason we have part of the reason we have so few viewers are the trolls themselves. But yeah, you can see my.
Well, I mean, if it's the people you're attracting.
Oh, okay, yeah. Can you?
I think if I'm attracting like 3 people that it's not going to be a troll. So
let's hope not. But remember,
you
last
think you're
time.
attracting we're attracting less than 5 people, and of those they're a troll. But whatever. I hope. I mean, if you're seriously professor of neuroscience, I mean, it's a pretty negative. Even God forbid. But I mean, whatever the case, if you're a professor of neuroscience, you want to talk interesting. You put like an email or something. Contact. We'll send you. You come on consciousness. Our problem of consciousness is our main topic. Jennifer turned me on to the Hammerose-Penrose hypothesis, the orchestrated objective reduction. We talk about quantum mind, science and physics in general, philosophy of science, but consciousness. So it says in Switzerland in the moment. So it's up if you're a streamer, you want to hop on and chat right now. Put some sort of contact information in the chat. We'll send you the link. You've been at the Hammer Theory of Mind conference. So I've been sharing these different conferences. I'm not sure if Theory of Mind conference is different than the Science of Consciousness. I know there's a whole bunch of different ones. I share these links in the chat. I'm actually going to be on T-Jump server tomorrow. I assume we're going to be talking about consciousness. That's our favorite topic. So appreciate you tuning in. Week in Review. So we're just talking, just like our update, what we're studying. And so today we were going over the least action principle. It's pretty important. I shared these links at the beginning on the least action principle related to neuroscience and the understanding of representations of how neural circuits might work. So sorry, but just want to no, I don't want to be talking to nobody, and the only person I'm talking to is like a troll. It's that's the reason I'm streaming. I hope we're actually getting in contact with interesting people in the subject. So he says he met Hammerov. So
I'm not saying it's a troll for sure. I'm just saying let's be careful because last time was a bit of a pain to deal with that. So I was thinking it could be some sort of a recursive model where you could start with a circle, then divide it by pi, and then see how many times you could keep doing that until you reach the Heisenberg limit. That was sort of my thought experiment. I thought, just put it out there. Looks like I've got a filter on that shouldn't be there. All right, there we go. So you don't want to keep talking about the least action principle, I take it.
Well, I was trying to be receptive to this person in the chat. Actually, I guess it's a woman.
Oh yeah. Well, if they are who they say they are, I'd love to talk to them. They sound very interesting.
In marketing and business or neuroscience. Well, interesting. So I'm not sure if you want to come on, but we appreciate you tuning in. However you heard about this, awesome. And I guess Thiel, the famous Peter Thiel, one of the most famous people in the whole world. If how that there's some sort of relation. I mean, Peter Thiel was in Germany, part German, but yeah, you can keep on going about it. I just tried to be receptive. Like it's kind of, I mean, we stream and also do debates or other channels, and we get trolls, God forbid. And so it's kind of depressing. It's like smaller viewership when we talk about more serious topics. We do like more generic debate, less intellectual stuff, get more viewers. So trying to talk about more intellectual stuff would be great if we could get serious people who know about the topic to join us. That's one of the goals of the show. But unfortunately, just being on the internet, I saw this. I searched the least action principle and on YouTube, and I found this woman in New Zealand who makes videos on physics, and she had an interesting um, series of videos. And I looked at her webpage, and then like she didn't have contact information. She said like 'cause she's a woman or whatever, like it doesn't pay to have people contact her, and that she had largely negative things happening from people contacting her, so she doesn't actually have any contact information or like doesn't stream or anything like that. So like God forbid, sign of the times, current things of the internet.
Oh, that's tough.
Thebe,
I found a really good
Thebes.
link. I'm just trying to hunt it down right now. Go ahead.
Her name was Thebes or something of Toby was her name, but she had Thebes or something was her channel name. And kind of like Physics Girl, and she even had cooperation with Physics Girl, where I think they even met in person and did videos together. Yeah, so least action principles, pretty important subject, and so I mean, kind of like
Argon the Sad wants to know if consciousness exists. You want to take that one?
Well, I mean, is a real question. Saying like, I'm saying you can't necessarily know that consciousness exists. Consciousness is something that we experience. You have psychometric data of the output of human behavior, but consciousness is largely based on empirical, like of internal observation, self-observation that can't be scientifically verified. As I said, so medically, consciousness is in the field of anesthesiology and refers to control of a person's own body, and meaning that there is a me that controls my body, and referred to consciousness of like going to sleep, or God forbid, like having anesthetics to be knocked out. So it's actually interesting that you really don't know if consciousness exists, and so like I think I'm conscious, and for me that's one of my expectations of dualism, or even arguments in favor of God, of a separate spiritual realm, because I think consciousness doesn't exist in the material realm, exists in the spiritual realm. From a scientific level, you only have psychometric behavior, the output of the human body. And like I was saying, laughter, is laughter proof of the soul? So you could say the body could output intellectual output. Like me and Jennifer are talking about mathematics and the least action principle in various things. But does that mean that there's a mind inside the body that's thinking about these things, that's conscious? So it's like the black box that we really don't know. We know that the body could output ideas. So I mean, that's the hard problem of consciousness. It is a hard problem because there is no working explanation of how the mind produces consciousness, and some materialistic theories say that consciousness doesn't in fact exist, like Jennifer has in the intro. And then Doovid would understand that consciousness is not in fact a physical phenomenon. Consciousness is a spiritual phenomenon.
Well, then it exists as a spiritual phenomenon? Is that the idea? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so scientifically you can't really answer the question, does consciousness exist?
Yeah, I would say that's because consciousness is the ground of observation. So you can't observe the ground of observation. It's just like you can't brighten up light because it's already bright. It's the thing that makes other things bright, Does that make sense?
You could observe the
Consciousness
effects
is
of
an
it.
attribute of materialism.
Well, you could observe the effects of it, but the effects of consciousness could possibly be explained by other things. So just because there's effects of consciousness, like just the fact that me and Jennifer are talking about abstract ideas, could possibly be explained by something other than consciousness.
There's a cause identified as consciousness. If you want to say it's not consciousness, you're just saying, well, I want to do a semantic distinction. Well, if people are identifying it as consciousness, so why make a semantic distinction?
Yeah.
I'm not actually sure if you're scheduled on the T-Jump server. He may be just planning to talk to you on YouTube.
He said he was going to send me a link. So I'm not
Okay.
sure if it's like StreamYards or something, but he said he was going to send me a link.
That's cool.
And I looked on his channel. He didn't have it scheduled. Maybe he doesn't.
He never schedules things, though, so I wouldn't take that personally. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to, yeah. So I would just say consciousness is the ground of observation, and my definition is that it's the capacity to undergo waveform reduction. Could also say that it's the waveform reduction itself, because that's all happening at the same time. There's no reduction without an expansion elsewhere. Conservation of, I want to call it a waveform surface area. It's not really an area, but you understand, some area-ish thing. Just like how when you think about pure forms, they're hard, but they're not actually hard because hardness is a property of a solid and they're not solid. So that's just one little thing I wanted to mention.
Even the evolutionary psychology claim that consciousness is just a PR company for your ego. I saw on Dutton, he said the founder of the field of evolutionary psychology passed away this week. But even the ego, to say whether the ego exists in consciousness, could be understood largely as the controller. That the ego, that there is an I that controls my body, and then also abstract thought, that there is an I that thinks about things. So whether that I exist, like there's a unique I that is a controller of myself, like I was talking about.
That doesn't establish anything. I mean, you can't establish an I controller, nor does the fact of an I controller actually prove anything. I mean, it's go ahead.
The Grossbergian adaptive resonance theory might be a model absent of consciousness, that you have sensations and sensations resonate and then cause a decision to be made, but there's not actually an I that makes decisions. There's just a series of sensations that cause reactions that eventually cause the person to take a course of decision, but there's not really an I that decides what my body's going to do. It's a result of trillions of instantaneous processes, and then all even thought to say there's an I that chooses to pay attention and think about things could also be a misnomer to what is actually going on. As I mentioned, like Grossbergian adaptive resonance theory, that there's just circuits working in my brain that are resonating, thinking about certain ideas, and enough of them resonate at a certain frequency, and it causes that to dominate my brain and cause the thoughts or the voice in my head. But that this concept of an ego, is Freudian, and ego is just Latin for I, um, and so the consciousness as understood as this separate I has a lot of problems, with like the hard problem of consciousness. But from a physicalist perspective, and even a dualist perspective, is, oh, the I is my immaterial soul. Then you have the interaction problem. So yeah, I would put it, besides the fact that there is a me, and I think I feel, experience, consciousness and ego, but scientifically, you would probably be safer off rejecting consciousness and saying it doesn't exist. That if you wanted to take a pure materialistic understanding, besides for the empirical experience that I feel I have this experience that's described as consciousness, that actually, like, scientifically, it'd probably be, that's kind of more like spiritual mumbo jumbo, and the remnants of ancient religious beliefs. But scientifically, there's no evidence for an ego or consciousness, and so it might be better off rejecting it.
Yeah, reject something that everybody self-reports as having, and see
Well,
how
so that's why I'm
what
a
it does to
dualist
your
and believe in,
credibility.
I believe for spirituality, but saying, if from a material perspective, I would say consciousness doesn't exist.
And I would say that such an assertion is undermining of credibility.
Well, I just have to rework what is the
Worse
personal
than
experience.
saying God doesn't exist. At least I can see where people are coming from with denying God, but denying consciousness is like, it's basically taking the T-jump position of saying there's essentially no difference between living and non-living matter.
It's
And
kind of like
again, that
free
is
will,
another huge
like
assail to
rejecting free
credibility.
will.
It's like, that's not anything anyone reasonable would agree with.
I think it actually is. It is the direction of research, and it's
Literally
similar to,
doesn't matter, because no one's going to be like, oh yeah, life and non-life, they're the same. There's no essential difference. Like, really, no, there is, and it's obvious. And to state otherwise is just, it's self-indulgent, really.
well, it's really just like
There's no
rejecting free
cleaner
will.
distinction than that.
You're saying, is there evidence of free will, and maybe you could design psychometric data to
Consciousness and free will are different things. You can argue whether free will is a thing, and I've often taken the negative against it. Consciousness, how do you argue against consciousness?
we said there's no physical evidence for consciousness. There's only psychometric output.
And I'm saying that it's the ground of observation. So you can't get evidence for the ground of evidence. The reason you can have evidence in the first place is because of consciousness.
Yeah, so you're already coming to a theological explanation. So just saying, like, I don't want to hear theological, spiritual mumbo jumbo. I want to hear about science.
And you're
And you
saying
can't.
consciousness is the domain of religion, not science. Is that a good plan? Just let religion have consciousness?
Well, or basically the old school behaviorism model of psychometric data. Don't try to explain the origin of psychometric data. Just analyze the psychometric data. So you just leave it like as an unsolved issue of what like, does consciousness exist or not? So we don't have enough information, and to posit a theory on consciousness as of now is more than the evidence would allow for, so it's unscientific in general. Like any any theory of consciousness isn't scientific. It can't be tested. It doesn't meet the criteria of science. So you have neuroscience.
Well, if it could predict behavior, then I suppose it would be somewhat scientific.
Well, I'm saying that's psychometric data.
Psychometric data doesn't predict behavior. It's data
But it was
associated with
behavioralism
behavior.
and patterns thing before the the advent of neuroscience in the 1800s. You had behavioralism where people measured the output of human behavior and methods to change human behavior. And if it was predictive, like Pavlovian training, that you don't need behavioralism doesn't require a mind. It doesn't necessarily even mean that you have a mind.
Yeah,
that
but
could
you
be
haven't
changed.
defined mind. You haven't defined it, and you've negated it.
Yes, I was saying that from behaviorist perspective, you don't need to have a mind. You could measure psychometric data, you could change behavior, and whether people have mind or consciousness is irrelevant. I mean, you could Pavlov, like, does a dog have consciousness? Doesn't change the fact of whether a dog has consciousness or mind or not, that you could train the behavior of dogs. And so if you want to look at humans in the same way, that humans, that human behavior could be measured and adapted whether we have consciousness or mind or not.
I guess that's the theory.
That's not the theory. I'm saying consciousness is a theory. So if you want to posit,
consciousness is something that people report as having, that now you're trying to negate the premise of without defining.
Consciousness is an experience that people report.
Again, nonsensical, self-referential gibberish.
Yes, I'm saying there's no evidence of consciousness besides that people.
And I've explained why twice. I said it's because it's the ground of observation. You can't observe the ground of observation.
No, I mean sense perception. So you have sense perception without consciousness. Just like you have a self-driving car.
No, you can't.
You could have monitoring a video, a sound technology that the body could just be a machine. And
but machines require a mind, right? Your problem is you haven't defined a mind, so you can't really negate it if you haven't defined it.
Machines don't require a mind. It's like just an algorithm.
Again, you're just saying this with no evidence, and then I could just dismiss it because it's a completely unsubstantiated claim.
No, I mean, I think you're missing the basics of the science. Saying that
I know there's been claims asserted that minds aren't required for things, but that's just a fundamental misunderstanding of the terms. You could say brains aren't required for things. Fine. I'll grant you that. That's all I'll grant you.
No, I mean, brains is a physical phenomenon. You say it's an observed phenomenon, but minds are not observed. You only observe the output of mind. You don't actually observe the mind.
Yeah, because the mind is the ground of observation.
Well, I'm saying you're defining.
And consciousness is the property
you're just creating a
that allows observation to happen, right?
You're just creating a definition.
I'm given the best way to understand it. There is no real definition that isn't self-referential to the point of being meaningful.
But I'm saying, as opposed to you trying to assert some sort of answer, you're just trying to assert an objective understanding of reality and say that you don't need,
I don't think it's objective, no. I'm denying that objective is even possible. You don't need a
theory of mind. You can have a system where minds don't exist.
You're saying that, but you can't prove it in any meaningful way.
You can't prove that minds do exist.
I can give you all the properties of a mind. I can justify all the emergence on the basis of a mind.
Observations exist, but it's circular. Observations.
As I said, the mind is the basis, right? Because of the notion of the divine solipsism.
But you're not. You're creating a system of understanding. You're creating a theory.
I didn't create anything.
And it's really an untestable theory.
You're projecting here.
I'm not projecting. I'm analyzing it. Like I'm willing to step outside of myself for the sake of trying to discover the truth, and including the possibility that mind and consciousness don't actually exist.
And what I'm saying is that it's inconceivable. And you can think that you're conceiving of a situation where that's the case, but you can't distinguish it. It's like a dream. You don't know if that's actually what you're imagining.
Well, I'm saying that there's a me to imagine.
You're using consciousness to simulate what it's like in a world with no consciousness. Well, you still needed
I'm willing
consciousness
to
for that
accept
in
that there
grad.
is no me. Okay, there's this body,
There's still consciousness. The
and
consciousness is
whether there's a
simulating
me
the
that
me.
actually controls this body or not is a hypothesis. That there's a
Yeah.
mind that thinks is a hypothesis. It could just
No,
be
the mind thinking is not a hypothesis. That's a
even
guarantee.
denying saying, okay, this is a phenomenon. There is a Doooovid. There is this body. There is these words coming out of it, but it could be all algorithmic, just like a computer where there's input output, and there is no me that controls the body. There is no mind that thinks about these things.
But isn't that
It's
nonsensical?
just
Doesn't there have
input.
to be a
It's
you?
just input output.
No, but doesn't there have to be a you? I mean, it's just a question of whether you're identifying what the you is accurately, but doesn't there have to be some kind of you?
No, I
How could we
mean,
have this conversation if there's no you? I mean, it's
well, I'm saying
insanity at some
this
point.
body. There's this body that's producing sound waves, but like that, there's a me that like a mind and a consciousness. Like no, there's a body that you're in, and there's a body that I'm in, and it's just input algorithmic where I perceive sounds coming in, and that elicits a response, and it has nothing to do with my or your mind or consciousness. It's just an algorithmic, uh, mechanical response of my body and your body, neither which has to have a mind or consciousness.
Again, without a definition, you can't assert a negative, and it's still unwise to assert a negative in the first place.
How did I assert a negative?
You said there's no consciousness. But you haven't
So it doesn't
defined consciousness.
necessitate consciousness. I'm not asserting it. You're asserting a positive that there has to be this thing, mind or consciousness that exists. And I said, like, no, there doesn't have to be
Yeah,
this
mind
thing.
has ontological primacy. That's because
I'm
it's
not asserting that like
solipsism.
mind doesn't exist or consciousness doesn't exist. And so it's a hypothesis that mind exists or consciousness exists.
It's a matter of ontological primacy. You only know your own mind.
I'm saying it's an unprovable hypothesis that mind.
The fact of your own subjectivity being the thing that's making the value judgment is what I am saying here. The mind, your mind is the thing deciding what to say right now.
That's unclear. I'm saying there's no evidence of that.
So you're denying that you have a mind?
I mean, honestly, I think I have a mind, but I can't prove it.
You can't prove you have a mind.
I could
Okay.
intellectually.
You can't prove anything else.
I could intellectually see that it's possible I don't have a mind or consciousness, and there could be alternative explanations to how, this how Doooovid and Jennifer are having a conversation that don't necessitate a theory of mind and consciousness. Just like Pavlovian dogs. So that, like Doooovid and Jennifer are just Pavlovian dogs, and there's just some sort of mechanical training, and our bodies are just eliciting mechanical responses that don't have minds or consciousness. I mean, I would argue dogs have minds and consciousness also, but it's saying in the same way that you could say,
even if the response is automatic, there's still a mind. The mind is what allows for the
you're
information
just postulating.
to transfer.
So you're making self-referential circular arguments.
So are you, but I'm the one who has the scientific edge.
No, I mean, you're just, you're not even thinking. I mean, you can't step out of your own paradigm to even understand what I'm saying. That you give
You're saying it's possible to speculate as to what a
I'm saying you're not even capable of doing anything but propagate your own
I'm familiar with what
theories
you're
and ideas. Like I'm capable, at least in theory, of abstract thought and stepping outside of myself to analyze new ideas or ideas that conflict with the regular beliefs and theories that I put forward.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I regularly put forward theories of consciousness, I could still contemplate an explanation, a theory that explains the observed phenomenon that does not include minds or consciousness. And you're just immediately, no, that's the minds or consciousness.
I'm saying
you can't even step out of yourself.
And I'm saying I don't think you can either, but I think you can convince yourself that you can, and that's fine. But
I don't need to convince myself anything. I'm just capable of abstract thought, that you're
How would you establish that it's anything other than a deception of your own ego saying, oh, yeah, you are imagining it, but actually you're not, and it's just hallucination?
because there's
I'm
no need
saying
to
it's not
imagine.
possible to fathom without a mind.
They're just elicited responses, that there is no mind or consciousness that's actually thinking about these things. So it's related to free will. Just like you say we don't have free will, and it's saying that in essence, that's saying there is no mind or consciousness. There's no
No,
me that's
they're not.
thinking
To
about
me, they're not
what
the
you're
same.
saying. Like, I'm not taking in what you're saying and analyzing various possibilities. It's just some sort of mechanical algorithmic response where you say something and that produces a response, and it didn't involve anything that would classically be understood as mind or consciousness. You're just like when you click a button on your keyboard, your computer's not conscious. Your computer doesn't have a mind. And say that yes, that generally most theories on the market of, so to say, the theories of mind and consciousness are really rejections of mind and consciousness,
Yes.
and explaining how the observed phenomenon occurs without the phenomenon of mind and consciousness.
Well, allegedly. That's allegedly what's happening. And I'm saying I don't think that's really possible.
Well, you're saying that the level of observed data of is not enough to draw a conclusion. So you have multiple truth hypothesis, and you put on the theory. So it would say that if there is a mind and consciousness, Doovid argues that that mind and consciousness does not exist in the physical realm. So my understanding, yes, I do have a mind, I do have consciousness, but that is not material. It doesn't exist in my brain or in the physical realm. You could have an alternative explanation where you
And
think,
by material, you mean massive. Because you understand there's a problem that material is animated by photon, and that creates the completely different effects from standard
well, I separate. It's not
classical
massive
mechanics.
or photonic. The mind consciousness is not matter or photonic, not massive or photonic. So for me, the material realm includes light. I would say not like this material in the spiritual realm is the realm of
And
light.
spiritual animates both.
Light
Is
is
that it?
light is part of the material realm, not the spiritual realm.
Okay, and spiritual animates both of those. Question mark? Is that right?
Well, I mean, there are multiple systems. Spiritual doesn't have to animate it. It's saying that mind exists in the non-material realm, and whether that animates, so not, animates is a. I mean, you could use the word animate, but like the classical say, the controller and thought, and so the controller might be proper to say animate, the I that controls my body, that has free wills, that has the ability to choose between different options. You could say that I animates my body, but the I that thinks about abstract thought, I wouldn't say animates my body. I'd say that's completely separate from my body and probably has nothing to do with my body.
It's not the controller of your body or anything.
Yeah, I mean, there's alternate theories of dualism.
I just want to know what yours is, or you're saying you're maybe not sure?
I don't have a complete working theory of mine. I more a student of saying there's multiple Kabbalists and systems that I've studied, and then there's just introspection, and most people I speak with, even you, aren't at a level of abstract thought enough to even really test to say what is your experience of mind, to put it together with my theory. Like the level where you could recognize that maybe the you doesn't exist, and there is no you that is an actual reality, in that the you, so to say, the
I'm
you
fine to
that
deny the you. I'm fine to deny the cogito. I never affirmed it.
it could possibly just be
I don't affirm a cogito. I don't call
mechanical.
that consciousness, though. I consider
From
the
when you were
cogito
born
an illusion.
till you are today, that there was never a you. It was just a series of action and reaction to stimulus. That there was never a you that animated your body or
Well-
thought or decided things. It was just from the day you were born till today, a mechanical response
No.
to stimulus.
There's a no. I mean, mechanical only in the most
That's the
absolutely
deterministic,
generic
the
sense of
basic
the term.
philosophical determinism is
Sure.
that I never existed. There is a Doooovid, there's a David Kelton that took birth to my parents, but there was never an I. It was always deterministic processes from the day I took birth till today. And there might be an illusion of the I or other people but in reality, it was just mechanical, deterministic, physical processes.
The way I see it is there's a light body, it animates the flesh. It's the thing that's reincarnated.
You're back on giving your own theories. I'm talking about.
That's not my theory. That's just standard Hinduism. It is the thing that simulates the sense of self.
Yes, I mean you give your standard explanations, but I'm talking about what is the observed phenomenon, what is the evidence, and then what are the various theories and explanations. And so obviously one of the theories and explanations is that I, mind, and consciousness doesn't exist. That's the deterministic. So you say in a deterministic model, you could still have an I, mind, and consciousness. Although I think that the main school deterministic theories would say that I, mind, and consciousness is an illusion and doesn't exist. You just say like materialism, you could have systems of morals and ethics or karma, but the main school materialism is that karma doesn't exist. So too, main school deterministic materialism is that mind and consciousness don't actually exist. They're just deterministic processes that were set into motion upon my birth, and all of my action from my birth till today had nothing to do with I, mind, or consciousness, but were deterministically decided by factors that what in theory would be a false theory of I, mind, or consciousness, in reality have no control over. It's basic like Newtonian determinism.
Sure.
And so, I mean, if you even accept that that's the main school paradigm, that I would say that's the default hypothesis. The default hypothesis, I would say, is materialistic determinism. And the derivative of materialistic determinism is nihilism, and not only nihilism that morals are preferences and karma doesn't exist. There is no reward for the righteous or punishment for the wicked, but also that I, mind, and consciousness are non-factual, non-existent entities. So you could have an alternative hypothesis to the default hypothesis that includes morals, includes karma, that includes I, mind, and consciousness. And so then you have multiple various models that include I, mind, and consciousness. You might be able to have materialistic models of mind and consciousness. You might be able to have you might be able to have deterministic models of mind and consciousness. To say that the essential reality is materialistic determinism, but yet there is still mind and consciousness, and then even free will. Some free will is generally paradoxical to determinism, although you might still argue that there's a materialistic deterministic system where free will still exists, and that's even Hameroff and Penrose, and I showed some of those were trying to argue, but it still was weak in those models of the orchestrated objective reduction, in trying to show how that would allow for free will. So the majority of models that have free will, consciousness, mind are dualistic with a non-material soul. And then within the paradigm where you have a non-material soul that's the origin of mind, consciousness, the I, free will, there's all sorts of models of that, and use the generic Hindu Kabbalistic models, and then even say like Doovid has my own model, and so how the hell does Doovid have his own model? Well, okay, it's based on thought, research, studying experts, my own introspection, and guided introspection of other people, where I've spoken to other people about their own introspection and trying to come up with a predictive theory of mind and consciousness. But I would stick to the default hypothesis is that mind and consciousness doesn't exist, and it's been a deterministic system from the moment Jennifer was born till today. Is completely the result of deterministic processes.
How much evidence is there in support of that position? Given, I mean, I just think to physics where they're like saying that the Schrodinger equation only has solutions for hydrogen, and yet you're positing determinism. You can't possibly mean determinism in the sense of.
I said determinism is the default hypothesis because deterministic is really the only scientific theory.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm not saying that determinism, mechanistic determinism hasn't been proven, but I'm saying it's the default hypothesis.
Okay, gotcha. It's like the Industrial Revolution choo-choo train
Even
varietal
from
of
a multiple
mathematics.
truth hypothesis that of the observed of the like a truth discovery equation, mechanistic determinism would have the highest truth value of any of the theories. I'm not saying that mechanism determinism is the true theory, but according to the current truth discovery process, that mechanistic determinism holds the default position as the default hypothesis and has currently the largest truth value. Like I'm not a mechanistic determinist, but I would admit, even though I'm not a mechanistic determinist, that the current explanatory power of mechanistic determinism is higher than any other alternative hypothesis, and hence it is the default hypothesis. Are you disagreeing about that?
I'm just saying, like,
You disagree that mechanistic determinism is the default hypothesis, and of the observed phenomenon and evidence that mechanistic determinism has the most explanatory power?
Oh my God. I mean, that's a really hard question to answer. Explanatory power. That's sort of assuming you know what people are going to understand. Pretty much, eh?
I mean, you could put it in terms of predictions, explanatory power in terms of like predictive power. Because I mean, if minds and consciousness doesn't exist, that or explanatory power in terms of that it could be programmed into a computer, not necessarily explained and understood by a mind or consciousness, but coded into a computer. So you could skirt that issue and by explaining explanatory power in terms of ability to be coded into a computer, and to some extent, can anything other than mechanistic determinism be coded into a computer?
Oh, that's a really good question. No. Because, I mean, just the word computation is so generic that I haven't had any problems modeling our consciousness as a computation. As long as you can accept that computers aren't the only things doing computation. Right. So that would be the way I would put it.
Yeah. But I mean, you agree that the default hypothesis is mechanistic determinism, at least of science.
Oh yeah, definitely. It has been for a while. I mean, you can argue that it's been that since, in some form or approaching that, since the Euclidean axioms, the Cartesian paradigm.
But you reject the
Basically going
natural
that direction.
conclusion that the default hypothesis then is also that we don't have a mind and we don't have consciousness.
I would say the default position right now is that mind and consciousness are not necessary for an understanding of mental processes, I guess. I'm not sure how it would be.
Of the
How it would
observed
be worded.
phenomenon. Even though we talk, you ask a person like, how do you feel? What did you experience? Why did you make that decision? That's not actually the best explanation of phenomenon.
Sorry?
Even though, like, in practicality, like, we're talking to each other like we have a mind and consciousness, but that's just a language of communication. But in terms of actual scientific explanation, that mind and consciousness are not, would say they're not necessary for explanation. You could add that mind and consciousness don't necessarily add anything to consciousness, to the explanation of observed phenomenon. And then even though people describe things in terms of mind and consciousness, that doesn't mean that mind and consciousness actually exist. That's just the modality that we use to communicate, that we communicate like there is such a thing as mind and consciousness, but it doesn't mean that mind and consciousness actually exist.
Are you saying there's something we identify as those things, but that they don't actually exist in a sense that transcends our own experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's a modality of communication. So I mean, why Doovid and Jennifer are talking about this subject right now is in reality because of mechanistic determinism. But the modality of communication, we don't talk about it like this is simply input output of prior mechanistic deterministic processes. We talk about it as if we have minds and consciousness that are making decisions to do these things. So I think it's just the modality of language and communication that is not actually the best explanation for what's happening.
And then what is?
Mechanistic determinism.
And then is that it? Is that the end of the explanation, or just because it does seem like a faith statement? I mean, I've heard these types of statements before, mechanistic determinism. I'm not sure
No,
what
I'm
that
talking
means.
about analysis of the evidence.
Okay.
Not a faith statement. I'm just saying, what's the current state of the evidence? You're saying, well, the default hypothesis is still mechanistic determinism. So I feel that there's an I in mind and consciousness, but it doesn't change the fact that the current state of the best explanation according to the evidence is still mechanistic determinism. And so there's an I that wants a different answer than mechanistic determinism, but mechanistic determinism could even explain why there's a false illusion I that wants there to be an alternative explanation to the reality. So just the fact that there's an I that wants to reject mechanistic determinism is not enough to reject mechanistic determinism. It still has the most explanatory power, despite the fact that I feel that I have an I that stands in contradiction to mechanistic determinism. And even if both of us agree that we both have an I in mind and consciousness that stands in opposition to mechanistic determinism, that still the factual analysis of the data would be that we as scientists should still leave mechanistic determinism as the default hypothesis.
Who's we?
Well, I mean, we is the illusion of there being a me and a you that have unique separate minds.
So we should assume
Or
as a
according
default
to an
hypothesis that
alternative
we don't have
hypothesis.
consciousness.
So it's okay, me and Jennifer recognize that mechanistic determinism is rightfully the default hypothesis, but act according to an alternative hypothesis. And Doovid has my own alternative hypothesis. Jennifer has her own alternative hypothesis. And then when we analyze the data, we have to look at it in terms of the default hypothesis, because mechanistic determinism is still the default hypothesis. And then our understanding of each other's alternative hypothesis and other main alternative hypothesis. And you need the multiple truth hypothesis to deal with the under framing things in terms of the default hypothesis of mechanistic determinism and the alternative hypothesis.
Well, there's more than one alternative hypothesis.
Yeah, the alternative hypotheses.
Yeah, so. Did you see what Moral Outrage Prophet put in the chat about let's see here, some sort of simulation? I haven't seen this. All right, I guess it's a bit too obscure.
Well, the thing is that still simulation is still a mechanistic deterministic process.
Anything with a computer, if you believe in mechanistic determinism, then the computer is the evidence that mechanistic determinism is pretty good evidence that mechanistic determinism has a basis, isn't it?
Yeah, or does, is it going to branch out where you have an alternative model of simulation, but the default hypothesis of the alternative model that we're in a simulation is still mechanistic determinism, and then but you could have an alternative hypothesis within the alternative hypothesis that we're in a simulation and it's not a mechanistic deterministic simulation.
Well, I suppose the nature of the simulation would determine if it was deterministic, right? Like I always have this issue with determinism because the Heisenberg uncertainty principle seems to contradict it.
No, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is just the information we can know. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle doesn't contradict mechanistic determinism. It just says that
it sort of says you can't know to arbitrary precision, like the Laplace demon. It sort of defeats the notion or deflates the notion of the Laplace demon.
Yeah, but I'm saying the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is in line with mechanistic determinism, and it's only dealing with the observer effect.
Well, if it is, then the definition of determinism is being undermined, because the notion of the way that determinism is defined in a classical sense is that if you know the conditions at t naught, you can predict them at t, plus whatever, the future time.
But you have to say this without an I in an observer. So it's saying
that's why I'm saying deterministic.
They're saying it's mechanistic determinism.
High boundary or high barrier.
That the cause that the state of current events is exclusively based off the state of past events. And so the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is not rejecting that the state of current events is exclusively
but it is rejecting that it can be uniquely
it's just rejecting that we could
uniquely determine it.
Uniquely determine it, and saying that but it doesn't. And it's saying causality. If you say the exclusivity of causality, like the least action principle, it was saying the least action principle is also related to causality, but you're saying that causality is exclusive. And then you say if causality is exclusive, you have mechanistic determinism. And then you say, okay, but maybe there's a spiritual realm, and maybe causality and mechanistic determinism is true, but the spiritual realm, so to say, could change mechanistic determinism. That some force from another realm could alter and alter the rules of at least material causality, whether there's a dualistic order of karma and causality, that there might be an ultimate balance of causality, but that material causality could be overruled by some force in a separate realm, so that the current state of events is not exclusively determined by the prior state of events, that some force in an alternative realm could of caused the current state of events to be different than what the prior state of events would have naturally caused, absent this force from the ulterior realm.
I guess it all ultimately boils down to accounting for multiplicity that seems to arise from a relatively simple set of initial conditions. That seems to be where it all falls apart for most theories. The micro to the macro step. So you're saying determinism and Heisenberg, that's not incompatible because Heisenberg is just a special case of determinism. I probably worded that like shit, but
Heisenberg doesn't have anything to do with the rejection of mechanistic determinism. It's only our ability, as independent observers, to understand the state of prior causes. And it's saying that if I, as an observer, tries to measure something, that it changes the either the current position or velocity, that doesn't mean that change of the current velocity or position caused by my observation wasn't mechanistically determinative. I mean, so if there's ulterior understandings of the Heisenberg hypothesis, so it's like me as an observer trying to observe the velocity or position at the same time would alter, as you get closer.
No, it's not about you. It's not about you as the observer altering anything. It's about the process of observation of localization, specifically changing the range of the canonically conjugate observables, position, momentum.
But it changes it in a mechanistic, deterministic way.
No, not the way they understand determinism. I'm not disagreeing with you that it's in some sense that it's determined through causality, but determinism has a specific meaning. And to me, determinism is given a single slit and a single electron gun, you know exactly where the electron's going to go in advance of firing it. That's determinism. And that is what the Heisenberg uncertainty principle makes a absolute certainty is not possible. And just like what Daryl's saying, it's a statistical thing. It's not a determinism thing. So you want to conflate statistics and determinism. Okay, well, you're undermining the definition of the term in the classical mechanics sense. You don't see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying. But I think the default hypothesis is still that the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is a mechanism of determinism. It's not a contradiction to determinism.
Really? Has anyone actually said that?
Well, I mean, it's a dispute among physicists.
I know, but you're saying that it's quite a. I mean, how has a physicist actually said that? That the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is consistent with determinism? I'd be curious because, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Let's just say. But
yeah, I mean that it's uncertain, whether the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is paradoxical to determinism. I mean,
I'm not saying
I say that mechanistic determinism is still the default hypothesis.
It is. I'm not saying it's not.
The Heisenberg uncertainty principle didn't change that.
That's
it
true.
might have weakened. So if they're saying the truth value of mechanistic determinism was higher before the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, but hasn't dislodged mechanistic determinism from being the default hypothesis. And it's not a set contradiction.
I said it's the limit. It's the limit of it because it's it's a counterproof. I mean, it's basically saying that determinism on the level of where the Heisenberg uncertainty principle has non-trivial effects is not possible in that sense, but it's still possible in the sense that we can know what the statistical distribution is of the resonances or whatever, as the limit as n goes to infinity of single electrons going through a single slit, right? If you want to count the you could call it statistical determinism if you really wanted to, you know. You see what I mean? But that is not what is classically meant by determinism. You want to wrap up?
Um,
Or is there anything else we want to talk about? What do you? I mean, we should talk about your thing with T-Jump. It's the thing that's happening tomorrow at 11. Do you have a plan going in, or just gonna wing it?
yeah, because he didn't tell me what we're going to be talking about, so I'll probably just wing it. I mean, I don't know what to prepare for. He didn't, so we'll see what he wants to talk about or how well it goes. And, like, let me check the email if he actually gave me a subject. No, he just said, yeah, it was kind of like JF. It was just like a one-line email. So
Oh, you're looking at T-Jump's email. I just said you want to come on this day, and that day is tomorrow. Is that it?
yes, I don't know. So I'm not going to put too much thought into it because he didn't tell me what we're talking about. So, we'll see. Hopefully, it'll be kind of like friendly, and we'll talk about knowledge or research in general. But who knows? I think I'm relatively prepared to talk about any subject, and try to phrase it in technical terms if I want to talk about.
I'm looking forward to it. I bet it'll be a good one. So yeah, sorry I don't have more. I was pretty busy this week just with all this cleaning up around the house. Fortunately, got a screen capture for the end of the show. I did send the link to memes, but I guess he doesn't want to come on today. Yes, maybe people are tired from the holidays and whatnot.
If memes checks out from earlier, I showed that we were talking about the least action principle and that Feynman's hypothesis was on the least action principle, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot to research and move forward. Just to mention, or did get memes popping into. Did you see the link I shared? Were you familiar with Feynman's PhD thesis on the least action principle?
I am not familiar with this thesis, so I don't know.
It's like 70 pages. We talked like an hour about the least action principle earlier, and one of the things I shared was the Feynman lecture. There's actually audio from his Feynman lectures that he gave, I guess, to undergraduates, and then you could find online.
I've listened to a couple of his lectures before. I find them interesting. I liked his style.
Yeah, you kind of have his even like copy his enunciation.
Well, maybe I picked that a little bit up from him because it's I find it interesting because in my mind he's a physicist crossed kind of with like a bit of the style of Robin Williams in that he can be very verbose. He can be very animated as well, but I mean he's also a pretty smart guy. I mean, do I necessarily agree with him on everything? No, but it's okay. I heard you two are trying to figure out consciousness.
Well, I mean, that's what we're always trying to figure out. I was just trying to lay out the, like a paradigm for looking at it as, to put mechanistic determinism as the default hypothesis that, me and Jennifer might have um, our own theories or alternative theories or mainstream alternative theories. But I think, scientifically, that I think, mechanistic determinism has to be the default hypothesis.
How could one get away from that?
Well, I mean, you can't. I'm saying that if the current state of evidence makes mechanistic determinism the default hypothesis, they're saying I have an alternative hypothesis. I might desire for the truth to be something different, but saying you have to go with the facts, and the facts, the current state of science, but mechanistic determinism as the current default hypothesis.
I'm just saying, and again, need total evidence for this, but if we're all kind of riding the wave function that is the power
Hypothesis.
cosmic, yeah, right. It
Of
basically,
evidence, that's why you have a default hypothesis.
right. Well, there are defaults there, but my base intuition is if there was going to be such a thing as free will, if we are going to be conscious beings, how might we achieve that? Because if you've got some grand cosmic wave function that basically, as far as we know, it seems to be determining all the stuff and things in the universe. How might one get by that? And for some reason, I keep on running across what's known as the Unruh effect. And essentially, what that is as long as you are in a continual state of acceleration, you're kind of almost outrunning what is basically just your standard waveform or whatever might be influencing us. So that got me to thinking. It's just like, okay, what if there was something as free will, and if that involved your accelerating, whatever is, if that may be, is if you're physically accelerating, maybe if even within your mind you're accelerating, trying to figure something out, that may have an effect on, as you would say, Doovid, the material realm. I'm just curious. Any thoughts on that, or?
Well, yeah, I was saying it doesn't change the fact that um, mechanistic determinism is still the default hypothesis. Then, so if you want to raise an alternative hypothesis, that doesn't, is saying you have to come up with something that provides more explanatory power, predictive power than mechanistic determinism.
What would you say is outside the material realm?
Well, to me, consciousness and mind are outside of the material realm.
One may say heaven.
Say what?
One may call that heaven, perhaps, or a heavenly realm, a spiritual realm.
Yeah, I'm going to say the spiritual realm, the alternative realm that mind and consciousness and even the controller of the body exist in, which is really classical religion, Judaic, Hinduism. Most mainstream classical religions have a dualistic model with a non-material realm that includes things such as the mind and consciousness.
Because again, I'm probably just a crazy person on the internet, but if we were to live in a holographic plane, and if there happened to be something, I don't know, maybe inward from that holographic plane, all I'm saying is the complement of the hyperbolic figure eight knots is
Surface.
basically two realms that
Surface.
basically, yes, you basically have
Surface.
that skin that's going along the outside, which may be a holographic plane that's being generated. But what
Surface.
is
Look,
okay?
it's a
Surface.
surface. Listen, stop.
Yes.
It's a surface, and sometimes it's a plane. So
Okay.
when it's a plane, what does that mean?
It's two-dimensional. Is that what it means?
No, it means that it's just like with a sphere. It's like, when is a sphere approximately a plane? when you're small in comparison to the surface, to the radius, I mean.
I think we're pretty small compared to the universe.
The important thing is where you can approximate as a plane, because it's almost nowhere. Because planes don't exist, because straight lines don't even exist. But why does it seem like straight lines exist?
It's our observation. It's easier for our minds to be like, that makes sense.
Are you saying you're papyrus pilled?
I mean, maybe. I mean, platypi are kind of complicated creatures, but papyrus, not platypus. Okay, I stand corrected.
Papyrus is the old word for paper.
Right. I was being coy.
Two-dimensional.
Right. But if you get two-dimensional plus two-dimensional, does that lead to an observed 3 plus 1?
You tell me?
It's a good question. I think
What's
it
the
might.
answer?
I don't know. It's kind of looking that way.
The answer is no. Obviously.
Okay. Then what does it lead to?
Well, we need to understand what the fundamental notion of self-referentiality is actually about.
So we're back to consciousness?
No, we're back to the measurement limit. We're back to why certain powers of certain polynomials don't have solutions.
They don't.
Didn't you say so yourself that the quintic didn't have solutions?
Oh, it just got really freaking hard. I didn't think it was insolvable. It's just like all of a sudden our brains go grrr. I just found that interesting. And again, maybe it's our personal computational power as well. It's just like, all I know is when I'm tired and it's even when I'm out running and stuff like that, I'm going across very similar topology and stuff like that. It's like, if I am extremely tired, and especially if I try to listen to a conversation like this, or you all going over like geometry or something, and I'm starting to think about that, my likelihood of tripping on like a twig or something like that goes up dramatically. Whereas if I just listen to just standard music I'm used to, just a standard rhythm, a beat, I'm a lot less likely to fall. But whether it's listening to something like this or like a Wolfram physics stream or something like that, it's like as soon as I'm using that computational power to try to think on other things, I lose additional motor functionality. So it's like to kind of almost model a human being is maybe a form of like a biological Turing machine. It's really isn't that far-fetched.
That's another self-reference. A Turing machine is a computer that emulates human consciousness. You're saying, let's model human consciousness as human consciousness.
Sure.
Self-referential.
It's a different eigenstate.
No, it's not. How?
Is it?
How is it different eigenstate?
I don't know.
Well,
Some
you
may
just
say the
asserted it. So was it another wishful thinking assertion?
It might be. It might be. But all I know
Yeah.
is
This
if
should
we could-
probably be curtailed.
maybe it should. Or maybe the only way to figure out what is certain is to venture a little way beyond that, into the uncertain.
Yes, you're just reformatting what Brian Keating said.
Well, that's actually what Arthur C. Clarke said that Professor Keating plays at the beginning. No, he plays it at the end. Basically, if one could, and again, yes, assertions, but I don't know. The assertion may have something there in that if the universe could potentially be modeled in the form of a quote unquote computational Turing machine, And if the universe
Once
and
again,
black holes and
you're not
electrons,
saying, okay,
oh,
hold on. You're saying, can we model the universe as a
what I'm saying is,
self-referential
if
model
our
of our own
basic
mind?
building blocks are computational, is it really that far fetched to say we're computational?
It's not. It's just a question of, is that anything more than vacuous? Okay, because tautology, an unexplained tautology is essentially vacuous, right?
Well, it need to be formed into something useful.
Well, the tautology on its own is more of a formalism. It's like a very short form of something.
Well, how would we go to define the tautology?
Something that's always true.
Okay. So we need to discover more fundamental components first before making such assertions?
No.
Better framework, or I'm just saying what we would need to actually figure it out.
Well, what did we, okay. You start with, what does it mean to have figured it out? How will you know when to say, oh, well, we actually reached our goal of figuring outing this?
I think we need to define the goal first.
Exactly. So what does it mean to figure it out? Does it mean you can, like, I mean, I don't know. Can you put that into words or not really?
What do you mean to say, like, your metaphysics of truth, that you think there's a truth and you're going to figure it out and discover it, and then it'll be obvious to everybody that this guy has figured out truth, or saying that, like, uncertain as opposed to, multiple truth hypothesis, uncertainty is the natural order of things. There's always going to be high amounts of uncertainty, and so the only thing you could do is propose an alternative hypothesis. It's unlikely that you'll be able to propose an alternative hypothesis that would dislodge mechanistic determinism, so say, from being the default hypothesis, but you could give more credibility to an alternative hypothesis, and then saying that not necessarily prove or make true that really the best you could do would be to remove mechanistic determinism as the default hypothesis, and your alternative hypothesis would become the new default hypothesis. But it's still not, like, true. And even if somehow your proposal became the new default hypothesis, that still wouldn't make it true. It would just make it, like the Kuhnian structure of scientific revolutions, that somehow your idea would displace the previous paradigm and become the dominant paradigm that people use to try to understand further issues.
Well, if we increased its statistical acceptance, I mean, isn't that kind of getting at what we want?
Statistical acceptance, meaning the number of people using the method?
Yeah. Or at least given some credence to it, because I think the more folks that are believing it, it's like, okay, our life actually has meaning, it actually has a purpose, it's probably going to increase their chances that they actually, I don't know, maybe do good things in the world, maybe try to act in a more positive manner. And the more and more folks do that, I think it's kind of contagious.
You're making an argument for, like, a higher state of vibrational consciousness type thing?
That sounds good. I'll go with it.
Well, there's still the issue, right, of the self-referential definition that we haven't quite, with the Turing computer, right?
Doesn't that just come down to each observer?
Well, you're saying, is the universe a Turing machine, essentially, unless I've misunderstood?
I mean, you could use that as a model. Basically, I
But
think
it's
that
not a model. It's not a self-referential model. Isn't a model. It's a fucked up definition that is going to end up inheriting whatever your mechanical computer axioms are. Excuse me, I'm
Well, I
going to
mean,
say computer.
computation. I mean, again, a kind of computer that elicits a particular thought. People think, okay, very often there's going to be silicon chips and stuff like that. Even though if you go back to what was it, Doooovid, that the machine that they discovered, like kind of like the brass computer with the gears and the cogs, it was basically going through and it could let you know things. And if you have a human brain and the brain is working on these different processes and thinking it's like, okay, 2 plus 2 does not equal 22. It actually equals 4, at least in most forms and everything like that. It's like it's doing work. It's having inputs, which in this case might be calories and then little neurons firing and stuff like that. And then it's coming out with an output. You get input, you get output. You're following hopefully the least action principle and everything and conservation of energy. And I mean, you could say that's a computer as well. It's just I'm trying to give some credit to Dr. Wolfram just because it's I listened to so many of those things on Turing machines and I didn't really get it at all. I'm like, okay, this
So you
seems
didn't
kind of
understand
boring.
it, so now you're going to talk about the thing you didn't understand. Why?
Because I think I'm beginning to have an understanding about it. And talking about these things help
You're
me to
understanding
understand it more.
your own consciousness more. You are not understanding a Turing machine because that's just saying it's a computer that can emulate consciousness. That doesn't mean anything other than it has the properties of your own consciousness. So all you're saying is, oh, I learned something about my own consciousness. Okay, what'd you learn about it?
Are you saying I'm conscious?
We're
You're
all
great.
conscious, but we can be more like we can have more clarity in our individual perceptual consciousness. So that's what it seems like you've
Can
experienced.
I don't know. Can we prove we're conscious?
Consciousness is the ground of observation, and observation is the ground of proof. So you can't prove the ground of proof. Right. So I don't even know why you'd want to.
So that'd be like falsifying turtles all the way down.
Well, if you understand what it is, you can't falsify it. It's just a theory hanging out. It's just a question of whether anyone finds that theory useful, right?
I mean,
Math is designed in a way that falsification only really means one thing, and being true is a far more general notion than simply what is colloquially thought of as true.
I'm just saying something could be true, and if other people don't believe it, I mean that's up to them. Although I would generally agree with you that if more people generally believe something is true, I mean that's probably going to be more positive as long as it's I don't know increasing good karma and stuff. That seems like a win.
So whether something is believed and it's karma, this don't know what the connection is there exactly. I'm not sure what you're trying to say. Sorry.
Eat, drink, be merry, and do good works. Put those good vibes out there. And if we can do it in a framework that we can get more folks to kind of understand and it makes sense and it helps elucidate what the heck is going on in this world, I think that's a more positive thing. I became a little preachy there. I apologize.
Yeah, it always seems to be like that. Like you really want to do good in the world. I mean, maybe everyone does.
I think people want to. It's just they don't necessarily know how to go about it. And they're like, well, I've had these bad experiences, so if everyone else out there is kind of doing these things, and then you see social media and you're seeing all these people with all these happy things and vacation, and you don't often see the person sharing the photos about after they had an OD and they were hooked up to this machine keeping them alive. I occasionally see those, and I respect those people for sharing those things because that is also reality. I mean, life can be extraordinarily hard and everything. You see all these terrible things going on all the time, and it's just like, well, I mean, that is truth, and you got all these different reference frames for it. It's like, well, if you could at least have some positivity and show that it's like, okay, we are human beings. we're not all perfect. We're perfectly imperfect creatures, and get some good vibes going on, and people feel like what they do actually makes a difference. That's cool. Like, Doovid's got to go.
No, I was just talking to somebody in my Facebook or Discord, something unrelated. I was listening to someone that asked me to give a thumbs up.
Oh no! I wasn't sure if you were doing a thumbs up for like me, or you're just like I need to hit the old dusty trail there. See, that was just based upon my observation there.
No, it was unrelated. Somebody
Okay.
put it on Facebook.
Oh.
Cole Isha, if you're watching, Cole Isha, welcome to Doovid's Discord. Thumbs up.
Okay, so Argon the Sad's
So we got
asking if
trying to get me into like his Discord. Like I really join things. And like even week in review, like we didn't even talk about politically provoked or any of this other debate stuff, and it's probably better to just keep it separate. Like the different venues going to get to. So go ahead. If you guys if you're going to stick around a little bit, I'll take a break. I got to wrap up. I just sold. I got to wrap some packages up. So if you're going to stick around, I'll take a break.
Well, I'd stick around for a little bit. I'm on vacation this next week.
woohoo.
Yeah.
Okay, Argon the Sad says we can't prove consciousness because it's at the ground level. Why should we believe in it? Well, why would you deny it? It would appear to take more energy to deny than to just accept, but I suppose that's an individual decision. Perhaps. The feelings must be followed. All I can say is that personally, consciousness would not appear to be, it would appear to be one of the things in that domain that is the least controversial. I mean, I hear people deny the soul. I don't hear people deny consciousness, just generally, as a phenomenon. Usually want to Socratically shuffle it onto a weaker target. What do you think, Memes?
Well, I mean, a lot of folks don't want to be told that they're not conscious because at that point you're kind of asserting that they're an NPC, and people usually don't want to be identified as NPCs. They
I don't
prefer
think
to be
that's
the player.
necessarily the conclusion people
Yeah,
draw
okay,
from
maybe
those
most folks don't
theories.
feel. No, I think consciousness is a wee bit easier because you go to sleep, you become unconscious. You no longer have just a continued thread of existence that you're perceiving there. So I think that's why it's a little bit easier. Whereas it's like, okay, if you no longer persist, well, do you have a soul? Does it go into another realm, or like what's going on? That's probably a little bit harder to prove, or for people to accept for a number of different reasons. Um,
Well, if you
I
deny the consciousness, you can't prove anything. So I don't know why you'd want to not prove things.
I mean, I don't know if that's true because not to go back to the computer analogy, but I don't know if a computer is not what we would identify as conscious because maybe it doesn't have general artificial intelligence. It can still prove
I
things.
can argue that a computer only functions because of universal consciousness, though, and you can't disprove it.
Now, okay, now we're talking about universal consciousness. Now, are we talking
yeah.
about individual, or are you speaking in the general?
Well, the notion is that the HF8 is one of the thoughts of the universal conscious agent. Not all of them, but one of them.
But at that point, just doesn't it just come down to the will to persist? And at that point, you could say pretty much star is conscious
in a very rudimentary way. So it's levels of consciousness. And so you can say,
we're
well,
back to your diagram. Okay.
You could say, okay, sure. Well, this lowest energy matter, well, because it's the lowest energy state, fuck you, you don't get to be conscious anymore. Okay, well, then you're saying that dark matter, quote unquote, is not conscious because that would be the universal 0 point energy or lowest energy anywhere. Fair enough?
I mean, because it has there's no black body radiation, doesn't seem to interact electromagnetically. I suppose one could say that.
You can also say that it has to be the maximum entropy or minimum energy state because it is the thing that exists in the highest proportion. So for anything other than the lowest energy state to be in the highest proportion wouldn't be in accordance with the least action principle in a generic distribution of matter sense.
Well, I mean, if you're going, well, I mean, that is one way to conceptualize it as well. But the issue I think we run into is we kind of treat it like binary, and if there's going to be different gradients of it, I think that's something that we should be a little bit more forthright with, because it's taking about 20 minutes to kind of at least get to this level.
Why is that abnormal? 20 minutes is actually really, really short.
Oh no, it is, but a lot of folks maybe don't have that attention span for certain things.
You're not
That's-
following the argument is whether the dark matter could be considered non-conscious.
I mean, you
It's
could
the
say that. It's
source
not very
of
nice in the
stars.
dark matter. Yeah.
Certain regions of dark matter are the source of new stars. So you're going to say the thing creating new stars isn't conscious, and I'm going to say that's weird because it seems like thoughts ought to bubble up. And so you have a bubbling phenomenon with new stars, but that's not conscious. So basically, you got to go with panpsychism across the board. Nothing else is coherent.
I mean, is it what's creating new stars? I thought it was more kind of like the excrement from stars.
You just have to think of it as purely as a density argument. Metaphysics is about what?
Deriving your axioms for how you're going to look at the world.
Yeah, good. How does one derive axioms?
I think the answer is first principles, but you need to
There's
define
no
them.
answer. There's no answer to it, right?
Well,
No answer.
well,
It's
isn't that a problem then? If there's no answer for what we're trying to figure out, I don't know.
Well,
Is
you
that where
should have
faith
said
comes
that
in?
I contradicted a definition. If you really wanted to get me, you should have said, "Oh, that's a contradiction in terms."
I'm enough of a
How
dick
dare
already.
you, Jen? And then you smash the table with your fist. You're just like,
Well, my laptop will fall off the little table.
I demand a duel at once, and I will have satisfaction.
I really hope I don't have to meme that into reality this year. The terrible thing is it'll probably work.
Well, you understand that, like, there's a certain. It takes energy to put a boundary on something. Like when you take your dog for a walk, you want to put a collar so they don't run off. That takes energy. Same with putting a boundary around something.
Does that follow the least action principle?
The point
Because
is
one
that
got-
not all matter can be bounded because bounding takes energy and energy is minimized.
Okay. But then again, putting the collar around your dog will save you energy in the future. Is that how we would define consciousness? In being able to account for
No,
future
because consciousness
stuff
is
and
an
things.
attribute of the dark matter as well. Because it also consciousness. Think of it in quantum mechanical terms. It just means waveform reduction. Don't think of it as collapse. Think of it as reduction, like a big guy going through a really tiny door. You know, he kind of gets a little taller as he sucks it in. That's waveform reduction.
It's the Mr. Burns thing again, isn't it? All the things going in through the door.
Yeah, so
Like it's-
Argon asks, why is it dark and can create stars? Well, because the only thing that acts in it is gravity. Gravity doesn't require a boundary. Gravity creates boundaries. Gravity is just the self-attraction of mass. That's how it can happen.
I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong there, because I'm just keeping it in my head, and I'm like, all right, well, if it's basically just if it has mass and stuff, because neutrinos are dark matter as well, so it's like, all right, well, you got that stuff there. If you got enough stuff clumped up, and whether we can see it or not, if there's any type of perturbation there, okay.
Well,
yeah,
if something
that's what I
has
mean.
no boundary, it has nothing except mass, then what's going to happen to it?
That's typically going to clump up.
Pretty much it's going to clump up, and is it going to clump up indefinitely?
No, I mean, you can hit critical mass. when I'm in my head right here, right now, I'm like, okay, I'm thinking it through. I'm like, okay, typically you see stars being formed from like just large clouds of glass and stuff like that. But then I play it through, and I'm like, okay, if you get the dark matter and stuff there, it's going to do that, and it's going to then affect the gas and everything. And okay, that makes sense. I'm working it out
What
real
is the
time.
limit of gravity?
Chandrasekhar.
It's quantum state exclusion. Okay. It's not hard. Okay. Gravity doesn't go on forever. Why?
It has a limit.
Why does gravity have a limit? Dude, it's the same
Good
reason the
question.
periodic table doesn't have infinity fucking states.
Oh, density.
What? Okay. What is the Pauli exclusion principle?
You can't have fermions occupying the same space.
Yeah, they can't be in the same quantum state. It's not space. Space hasn't. There is no space here. You got to understand. Space requires energy to exist.
Okay.
Space doesn't necessarily exist. You understand?
Okay. No.
What exists without space?
No idea.
Mass. Mass without a border doesn't define space because space necessitates a border, right? Space, trivially, is the distance between two bordered entities, centers of mass, at least the way we model it with physics right now. Not going to say it's unreasonable. So Daryl's asking, what boundary does gravity create? I'm trying to explain it, but I can't keep this guy focused for more than 25 microseconds on a single topic here. So do you understand why gravity doesn't just continue accreting matter in perpetuity? Please tell me that this is not. I just want to make, I don't want to continue if you don't get it, because that's just me saying it for nothing.
Say that one more time, please.
Okay. We've got some stuff,
Okay.
some mass.
Yeah.
And what happens to it?
Coalesces.
Why?
Gravity.
Does that go on forever?
I mean, locally, no.
No. Why?
Or because it hits a limit. It can only
Which
have
is?
so much Pauli exclusion.
There you go.
Okay.
So the question is, how does this Pauli exclusion principle create effects on that scale? Because you're dealing with something that doesn't have a boundary. And our whole ability to conceptualize things sort of relies on boundaries. So it's pretty confusing to try to get your head around what's going on that level. But that's basically, so you followed me to this point. You're saying necessarily there's going to be some type of quantum state exclusion because of a gravitational well being something that, if it's self-generating, has to also self-exclude in accordance with the uncertainty principle. You following that?
That's how we.
That's where space is created.
Stars.
That's where space is created. So up until that point, space doesn't exist. Then space starts to exist, and you have a creation of what's called an ether field, and that's a space-time crystal. So that's the sun plus all the planets, that total volume. Think of that as the ether field, and then they move around, but the total volume that they sweep out in a particular time, that remains not exactly constant, but it's something that you can approximate as a constant on the scale that those changes are happening. Did you follow all that?
No.
Volume between the sun and the planets. Can you visualize that?
No. What I'm saying, I'm still trying to figure out how, when you're saying space, are you referring to what we typically refer to as space time?
Yes.
Are you talking?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So
All right.
prior to that, there was no
Okay.
space. Why was there no space?
Because I'm thinking about the Planck
space-
length. I'm like, oh,
Space doesn't exist necessarily because space actually takes energy to create. And I just showed you
That makes
how
sense.
space is created through energy. What's the energy? Well, it's the gravity plus the fact that there's this maximum density.
Oh, okay. No, you that actually just answered a couple of things that I
Good.
had been kicking around. That I'm like, how does this even work? Okay, no, go on.
I'll just remember that this relates back to what you originally said when you were speaking on the notion of, well, why does everything have to be modeled as conscious? And I'm saying, like, well, if the 0 point energy, the lowest energy state, is so active, if anything's conscious, isn't it kind of that? So if the lowest is conscious, then everything derivative of the lowest is also. It's just because you're going from the lowest to basically the highest, not the absolute highest, because I don't know that there is an absolute highest because it's relative to how much matter is necessarily excluded based on the gravity field. So it's totally dependent on the local gravity field. Right. It does appear to be fairly, I don't want to say deterministic, but fairly what you'd expect based on the slit experiments. So not purely deterministic, but fairly symmetrical in a
You're making the balloon in my head inflate again. I thank you, but it's a little uncomfortable right now. So no, I mean,
creating
no. This is
emptiness
why I
in your
like
mind.
This is why I like talking to you, because it's like, okay, I have these ideas. Are they fully fleshed out? No, but I continue to talk. I say some words that you correct me on, and I'm like, okay, and I listen, and I'm like, clarify, please, and I'm like, okay, all right. Now, what I kind of had in my head is making more sense. It's more refined. It's more formalized, and I get a better idea of what's going on. That's why I asked, what's going on?
So think of Zeus, aka Zeus, and his giant.
The Titan, Kronos, and stuff like
What's
that.
the
Yeah.
one hitting? Oh God, making thunderbolts.
Zeus is typically the old Greek god of thunder, king of the gods. Or are you talking about Hephaestus? He was the smith.
I'm speaking on how someone hitting a. I don't know. It's like he would make. Anyway, I'm gonna have to look this up, but he would make thunderbolts with a forge
I think it's Hephaestus.
and then hurl them. So the thunderbolt is a metaphor for the animation of matter because it goes from being unbounded, gravitationally collapsing, and then it becomes bounded, becomes a star and a bunch of planets, and it begins a space-time event. So we're 4.5 or whatever, 5.45, whatever the value is, into whatever it is. I've actually honestly forgotten it.
The Earth itself, we hypothesize like 4.5 billion years. The universe is like
All right,
13.98 or something. Yeah, give or take a few billion years based upon our observations.
My argument is that that happened for us that length of time ago, and that's why we can measure that time, because we actually started, and matter has a beginning and an end. Even stuff like hydrogen atoms, they don't have an infinite lifetime. They have a lifetime, a statistical lifetime.
I think we all do.
Yeah, I just sold a few CDs. I'm sending one out to Waukesha,
Nice.
Wisconsin. God forbid. I don't think I'd heard of Waukesha till that tragedy a few weeks ago, but someone there just bought a CD for me. Porcupine, the I think German band. I actually sold a few more CDs, but I'll take care of those when we're finished. So, do you want to wrap up? Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? Back tomorrow, hopefully they'll go good. I mean, T-Jump's got a pretty big network. He's going to be IRL, one of the main debaters, modern day debate. He even talked to some relatively big names. So hopefully that will go well. I guess Jennifer's already a mod or pretty connected, so hopefully it'll be relatively friendly. It'll be a productive conversation.
Yeah, I think so.
I think I'm gonna avoid the politically provoked drama. So there's other Jews or whatever that are gonna debate and defend the Jews. I'll bow out and let them take over, and not. So I don't see too much programming coming up. But if T Jump goes well, if it gives a venue for more philosophical theologians, that probably more my speed, and people have talks on the heart, problem of consciousness, or theories of mind in good faith. Although it takes a lot of abstract thought to be able to talk about theories of mind. So we'll have to see how that goes tomorrow, and play it from there.
Looking forward to it. Talk to you soon. I'll talk to memes for a few minutes, I guess, before the end of the show. And I know there's a couple questions in the chat. I'll get to those before we wrap up.
Okay, great. So
Cool.
in touch, everybody, and thanks. But I thought we made some good ground going over the least action principle. Not that much content, but I think it's more worthwhile. I mean, if Based Mike had came on, or Conops, and talked about politically provoked, and it may have also been productive to be in the the news of what's going on in debate. I think Brittany is going to be on on modern day debate on Wednesday. Actually, her first big debate. So maybe next week we'll review that, and but so it might pay to kind of stay out there with what's going on with the debate and some of the minor drama. But we'll sit on it for this week. And so have a great week, everybody, and be in touch. Blessings.
Blessings.
Blessings to you, Doovid.
Yeah, even just thinking about drama, I'm just like,
I like drama, but it's just I don't mind. Well, the thing is, I'll listen. I'll be like, okay, let me listen to side A. Side A says this. This is absolutely true. I listen to side B. Side B says this. This is absolutely true. It's like, is it possible that perhaps certain folks that were observing this might be embellished, just legalized dueling? And if you guys are, I think a lot of people just want to fight for the sake of fighting, and if
people
they
want
don't,
to trash talk on the internet. That's
yeah.
like hyper socialization. They're not going to be the dueling type people. The
This
dueling
is
type
why I
people are
don't think
more
I
the
get
strong,
invited a lot
silent
of
type, I
places.
think.
Because, well, this is why I say it's like I probably don't get invited a lot of places because it's like I'll be very pacifistic, and then I'm like, if you have irreconcilable differences, I say we let consenting adults engage in mortal combat under the doctrine of bodily autonomy.
I can't
And then
imagine why anyone would take issue with that or find that tacky. I just wanted to respond to like something in the chat. The forever time, gravity will be forever space. Look, it's a model for fuck's sake. So I think gravity is instantaneous, basically. Forever time, forever space is yet another one of these poetic misconstructions that we don't really have the capacity to, because you're talking about infinite regression at that point. Definitely no boundary to the universe. Why? Want to guess at the answer why there's no boundary to the universe? Means?
it goes on and on, my friend.
No, you
what
want
you
to
mean by
use the least
bounds.
action. Use the least action principle.
Okay. I don't know what that means. Well, in this respect.
You have two possible states, right? One has a boundary, one doesn't.
Yeah.
Which one of those is more action? Think of it like the dog with the collar. Is it more action to put the collar on or not put it on?
The sphere was least action.
It's the notion of a boundary. We haven't even got to a sphere yet. Sphere implies we've imposed a geometric ordering principle. We're just talking about the notion of a boundary here.
Okay.
And whether the universe has one.
I mean, I'm probably going to disagree with you on this.
So you think
That's
what?
fine.
Well, you better tell me what you think before you tell me if you disagree.
I think we're living the surface of the HFA complement.
So does that mean the universe has a boundary?
That's why I said it depends on how you define boundary. Because if
So
it
you're
still
saying
goes
there's a
on forever,
boundary. Okay, you're saying there's a boundary under us.
under and below, kind of.
Under and below. So I have a question. Why did you feel the need to say under and below as though they're different things?
Because I'm
How
tired
much
right
okay,
now.
I was just gonna say, how much topology have you been studying right now? I'm like, wow, it's pretty
Well,
hyper
it's
fine distinction going on.
the crazy thing is, depending on how it works, what happens if the smaller circle is actually the outer circle? I kind of got this idea when I was taking my shirt off and I had my outer layer there, but it kept on falling out. But it was easier when my smaller shirt was encompassing my larger shirt. It was easier to control. It'd be crazy if it was true. I just have no evidence for it.
It's an argument from 0 point energy. Which is more energy, a bounded universe or an unbounded universe?
I mean, I don't know.
Which takes more energy to create as a system? A
I mean,
bounded system
but
takes more energy because a boundary is like a leash, or sorry, a collar. Damn it. Damn my metaphors. Wait, I just
does
want to
doesn't
answer
the unbounded take more in the long term though?
because it's falling into nothing. I don't think so. Okay, Daryl wants to know there's no. Yeah, sorry, I just want to read it. Without matter, space is zero. Matter does create space through gravity and quantitative exclusion. Do we assume proton decay? I haven't even thought that far ahead, to be honest. I just seems to be there's an intrinsic age to matter, which is inferred by the decay of particular elements. There's no
I mean,
place where there is. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just gonna stand by. Given enough time, it'll just all recycle back into energy, and then we'll have the observed inflationary period again, and we'll do it again and again. The universe goes on and on, my friends. Just my
Turtles
take.
again? Turtles?
The crazy thing is, I mean, that could be true.
So what
I
is the
mean,
what? I'm sorry, I don't even literally understand what it even means for that to be true. I'm still sort of mind blown.
What I'm referring to is the whole adage of an electron, a black hole, and the universe walk into a bar. If they are all essentially geometrically, in a way, the same form, if we be living in an electron, we may literally be living in the mind of God or on the back of a giant turtle. And at that point, if that happened to be true, it's like then the universe, multiverse, God, whatever you want to say, literally could be mind exploding, impossible to conceptualize. But we run to girls' incompleteness thingamajigger because we're bounded observers. We can't see outside our own
okay,
universe
but
yet.
then you understand that there is.
Let's focus on this universe right now. I agree.
Look, it's not about that. It's about what does the Gödel theorem actually tell us. Don't let that be the limit to what you're like, to the thoughts you allow yourself to entertain. Come on.
I'm trying to give my mind a little bit of peace rather than trying to figure this out right now.
So what you're saying, I'm going to hide behind Gödel skirts because I'm afraid
Yes.
of what the alternative implies. As long as you're completely aware of the fact that's what you're doing, I guess I'm all right. But yeah, if people want to read an article that I actually...
How dare you hold me to a higher standard? This is why I like you.
Well, you know what? I think your hair looks pretty good. So maybe
Totally
as
need a
tough
haircut.
as it is, that you're having some very positive effects. I just put it again in the chat. There's an awesome article written by, I think it's a Westerner, but going into a lot of these subjects about Advaita Vedanta that seem maybe, and also the emptiness, the nothingness, etc., seems maybe a little more beginner friendly.
Can you make your website more user friendly? Just because there are things that you show me before that I try to find, that I'll spend like 10, 15 minutes looking for, and I'm like, that I just lose it. I'm like, I can't find it. I give up.
Yeah, I can definitely work on that. So Daryl says, because there's no place where there's no space, if the universe has a boundary, that means there's space or a place. What is the boundary? Yeah, there's a de facto boundary. But energetically, there can be no boundary because...
Oh, you're asking me a question?
Why is there no energetic boundary? Because it's a cost that doesn't need to be bore, and the least action principle abides. A boundary is more energetically expensive than no boundary. but
In the short term.
it has a de facto boundary in that it has a size in that there exists a finite distance between stars that is the maximum such distance. So it can
You're
be
giving me more
finite
things
in
to
that
think
sense,
about.
but in unbounded as well. Now, whether it's finite truly or finite only in our capacity to perceive it, how the hell could we ever know that? We can't. That's just a bullet we have to bite. You understand what I mean, right? Like, imagine there's another identical universe to this, but just like on the quote other side physically of this one. How the hell could we know that that was the case or not if we don't interact with it because it's too far away, right? How the
So
hell
I
would we ever know
invoked
it was there?
Girdle.
Do
Because
you
I feel like
understand my
talking about it
argument?
right now.
Do you understand the argument I'm making?
Yeah, but you kind of contradicted yourself there. You're like, don't be
How?
limited by what this dude says, and now you're like, well, we cannot know. I'm just
Wait,
using what
no.
you taught me in the past 30 minutes.
What seems like a contradiction? Sorry, I'm confused.
No,
The
no,
finite
I
but
said
infinite thing?
trying not to think about what may be outside our perceived or
All
observable
I'm
universe.
saying is we don't know what's beyond our
Right? No, I have
observable
no idea.
universe.
Yeah, no, I
We
agree.
can't know because the observable universe is all we can know. That's the definition of the observable universe. What we can observe. And what we know is based on what we can observe,
For now,
isn't it?
I don't know. We didn't really plan on going past Earth or certain continents a while ago, and we've done pretty well as long as we don't obliterate ourselves. Should be good. Oh, and I'm also going to totally recommend Don't Look Up. It's on Netflix right now. It's so fun because they make fun of literally like all the different groups and stuff like that, political persuasions and everything like that. And it is kind of sciencey and it's kind of fun and has Leonardo DiCaprio in it. It's basically two astronomers. They discover like a gigantic asteroid. It's like, oh, we're so excited, and they keep on doing the math and everything. It's like, why does that keep on getting closer to zero? It's like, oh, because it's gonna hit the Earth in 6 months. And then people disagree. Like they literally go over and they're doing polls. Like 23% of people believe there isn't even an asteroid. And at one point during the movie, it's like, yeah, just look up. You can literally see it in the sky. I think it was a good movie. That's my final talking point.
But yeah, just coming back to what you said before, you'd say that we have a well-defined lower boundary but no upper boundary.
I mean, personally, I meant to say, think like shell of an egg or a clementine.
Well, that doesn't answer the question. You're saying we're on the surface of the clementine?
No, I'm
Somehow?
saying we are within the peel of a clementine.
We're within the peel of a clementine.
Yes.
Okay. Now, how do we know where we are in comparison to the opening, let's say?
You have to measure the acceleration of the universe and being able to extrapolate. Because basically, if the universe was going to be viewed as accelerating, if we're coming top of a spherical HF8 object, if there is rotation generated by that object as well, as we come down along more of the equator there, we're going to be or have higher observed acceleration. That might also explain why certain galactic structures seem to be disappearing from our vantage point.
Because to me, it seems that we don't exist in the same world as the HF8. It's
Well, it
somewhere
depends on the
else.
perspective. Well, the internal motion, that's the thing. That's technically, that's why I was talking to Doovid about like the spiritual realm, what people might consider heaven, because if you were to put a fluid in that, and that's why I've been looking around for folks to do different vector plot graphics and stuff, because basically our quote unquote realm is separated from technically the interior of that hypersphere like object there. And what could be the volume within there would be much greater than what would be up along the rind or the peel itself there. And I have no idea what that is, but it's like Seems like a pretty good metaphor for heaven. I don't know.
Yeah, so Daryl says if you could instantly teleport to any place in the universe, is there a location you could teleport to that's any closer to a boundary? Well, that's like saying, is there anywhere you can go on Earth that's any closer to leaving Earth? Well, no, but Earth is still bounded in the sense that it has a finite mass.
Well, that would depend on your definition of like leaving Earth, because I mean, you could say Mount Everest. You're still on Earth, but if you're going to measure Earth from like the exact gravitational center in and of itself, it's gauge wise. This is the way that Dr. Eric Weinstein kind of explained it. That at least kind of stuck with me is if you're going to try to measure from sea level, yes, okay, Mount Everest, you're going to be what, like 5-6 miles above sea level, whereas if you're on the beach, you might be 5 feet above sea level. So that's basically how you're utilizing gauge. I think that basically you're gauging your distance relative to wherever you're measuring from. Again, depends on your definition.
Yeah, it still doesn't make any more sense to me. Sorry. I'm basically trying to draw a distinction between a massive boundary and a literal physical boundary. One is to do with total density, and one is to do with actual something existing on the edge. Like, would you agree that Earth has a boundary? The planet Earth?
Again, definition, are you saying like physical material, atmosphere, electromagnetic, gravitational well?
Exactly.
Or...
It's like in a way it does, but in a way it doesn't. So you could see that, well, there's an atmosphere. Of course there's an atmosphere as a boundary. But then in another way, it's like, well, there's no actual like ceiling or whatever. So the question is, does it make sense to model it as a boundary or not? And in the case of Earth, yeah, of course, because of the atmosphere. Because you have a situation of the planet Earth being so much bigger than the moon, and therefore being able to house more microstates associated with the water's liquid phase, creates an atmosphere which is a de facto boundary.
Okay, all right, I see the drive of what you're getting. Okay, no, that is a good argument. That is a good argument. That is a very fair point. Okay. See,
Daryl says, I think the observable universe diameter is just a function of inverse square law that give a long enough observation time you use. There's no way to know. You can't know what happens beyond the observable universe definitionally. You can speculate using a model, but that's not the same as absolute certainty, right? There could be a whole other, that's what I'm saying, there could be a whole other universe, quote unquote, on the other side of this quote unquote universe that we just don't have any access to, but it's still there. There's basically just no way to know past what's observable, which is itself something intrinsic to matter. It's the whole argument is like, matter has an age. We can only observe matter that's still animate. And matter has only ever existed for a certain distribution of ages for all the quote time, which isn't really time, it's just infinity causality, beyond time. Because what we call time, that only really exists locally when a star is created, right? So can you still call it time if you're trying to apply it to the universe?
I've heard a couple people, including Thad, refer to it as a different form. I've heard Thad say super time, and I heard another lecture the other day where somebody else said something. They didn't use the word super time, but basically it was a more universal time rather than what we consider it locally. And that's where I think folks come up with two concepts of time. We might need better words.
There's causality. Causality is what we confuse that with time. It's very, I mean, why wouldn't you want to equate those two things?
Yeah, because in a way they are both kind of time, in that we're kind of keeping track of like what's going on. It's just on the scales. Again, we're still working on it. We ain't done yet. a lot more work to do. But that's about all I got right now, Jeff. And I'm kind of tired here to hit the hay, and maybe do a stream later in the week, continuing the talk.
Woo! Thanks for coming on, and
Cool.
appreciate your contributions. I'll just keep talking to the chat.
Cool. I'll be listening. Have a good week, everybody. We'll see you.
Talk to you soon. Yeah, Daryl, you're going to come back to your theory and you're going to piss me off again here. So I don't know how many times I need to tell you that self-referential definitions, yeah, they don't work. And just randomly saying inverse square law attenuation, that doesn't tell me anything. You have to say, well, I speculate that mass is it mediated by some sort of particle photon entity? One. If you extend the observable universe, then that's the observable universe. It becomes a matter of prior to your extension, you didn't have access to all the observable universe, and then you gained it. But then there's still the unobservable universe, and definitionally, pretty hard to know. It's my whole point. That this, I don't know, the adage I think is the unknown unknowns, or you can't know what you don't know, or whatever. It's silly, but the ending of the first Men in Black movie, where it's the aliens playing with dice, you know. There's just no way to know if the scale is different. I'm not saying the aliens with dice could happen, because obviously my theory is saying that what occurs only really occurs due to scale resolution being at a particular ratio, necessary ratio for it to happen. You couldn't have life on the scale of multiple galaxies, because the measurement limit, that's operating everywhere. But that is an additional supposition that not everyone's going to agree with. So with no interpretations, yeah, there's not much you can say. I have been triggered several times by what you've said. Yes. I'm not triggered by something you might say. Just trying to make it clear that I'm not even remotely tired, and you're clearly are. So just saying. And I hope everyone had a wonderful, wonderful time on the show, and looking forward to the next one. Until then, take care. See you next Sunday, if not sooner.
I mean, that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of.
It's so important that she can't be told, she won't be told that it's wrong. And
bringing it back to Church of Entropy and her attack dog Gandalf the White.
Why don't you learn to shut up and fuck your goddamn logic?
they control the media, and the media is capable of making the sheeple believe in anything.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, we've had these streams, and I've been doing with Church of Entropy, and she's been bringing on new people, and like we did those streams on like stream etiquette. We walked through like the technology.
I have like very strongly negative opinions of the kind of Brundle clique.
Is she trying to garner herself cult prestige by associating herself with a retard?